Chapter 1046. With Grimm's cautiousness, it was impossible for him to not notice the enemy's sudden attack. With the help of the boots of ash, Grimm teleported out of the pillar of flames without hesitation and flew away. As soon as his body left his original position, the incomparably violent sword light chased after him, slashing the pillar of red flames that shot up into the sky in a boundless flying flames that scattered in all directions. Grimm's flaming body stepped on the uneven mountain of corpses and bones, quickly dodging and evading the incoming attacks. The two dazzling streams of crimson flames behind him were like flaming cloaks that spread out. Using the spurt of the flames and the counterforce, he quickly flashed through the narrow and rugged space, dodging the terrifying sword lights that broken-faced Jia Luo sent after him. If Grimm was running on foot, he would not be able to escape even if he used all his strength with his 12 points of agility. However, with the help of magic in his own mind, Grimm's control over the power of flames became more refined. At the same time, he developed a new method of movement that matched his own attributes. Using the power of flames to condense a magma armor on his body, Grimm could control the flow of flames to shoot out from the small holes in the armor, propelling his entire body to glide at an explosive speed. For this, Grimm even ordered the AI chip to spend a lot of time and effort to design a new lava armor for him. The most special thing about the lava armor was not its defense, but the hollow layers and the various small holes on the surface of the armor. Grimm could change the path of the flames and the positions of the holes without moving his body to adjust the direction and angle of his glide. At this moment, Grimm was like a strange flaming man. His body was always facing broken-faced Jia Lu, and his body was spraying dozens of scarlet flames of different colors, thicknesses, and strengths in all directions. Meanwhile, he was moving quickly in space in a strange way that completely violated the laws of human motion. Even though the black sword rays crisscrossed around his body and seemed to have blocked off all possible escape routes, Grimm did not move at all. Instead, he moved like a fish and swung his tail a few times to shake off the pursuit of the sword rays. The berserk shattered face Gallo had obtained a rare chance to fight Grimm fairly, so he naturally would not give up so easily. He stomped on the mountain of corpses with all his might, creating a huge bloody hole with every kick. His body, under the tremendous force of the recoil, chased after the flaming man at an astonishing speed. The pinnacle of strength was everything. Although Shattered Face Gallo only had 17 points of agility, with his 39 points of strength, his instantaneous movement speed was not any weaker than Mary's, who had 37 points of agility. However, in a moment of rapid change, Mary would be smooth and calm, without the slightest trace of anger. On the other hand, Shattered Face Gallo's great strength created miracles. He needed an even more violent burst of strength to barely stop his flying body. Therefore, under the stomping and slashing of the face-shattering Garo, the enormous mountain of corpses that was almost 20 meters tall was covered in blood, meat scraps, and all kinds of bizarre-looking broken limbs were flying everywhere. The two-tier, three wizards chased after each other in such a gloomy and terrifying scene. Violent sword rays and transparent flames intertwined with each other, crazily washing over each other's bodies. As for the elemental equipment, it was stationed thousands of meters away, bombarding Shattered Face Gallo's body at an extreme speed of one shot every 7 seconds. Even though Shattered Face Gallo's body was constantly dodging and running, the magic rays were always accurately locked onto his back. Although the 350 degrees of energy was not enough to break through his body, each hit left a finger-sized burn mark on Shattered Face Gallo's chest. More importantly, every hit from the elemental equipment came at a crucial moment when Shattered Face Gallo was chasing after Grimm, causing his body to suddenly stagger and lose the best opportunity to attack. After one shot, it would be a small dot. After 2 shots, it would still be a small dot. However, as the shots went on, countless small dots would gather together and form a bowl-sized wound that even face-smashing Jia Luo did not dare to ignore. After all, The heart that had been placed there was not Garo's original heart, but the withered heart of a necromancer king. If that spot was attacked, although it would not kill Garo, it would still reduce the aura of death that he regenerated endlessly. Left with no choice, Garo could only sink his feet deep into the pile of corpses, plowing out a terrifying trench that was 1 meter deep and 2 meters wide. Only then did he barely manage to stop his frantic advance and take the opportunity to dodge the next magic ray. However, just as Garo's body paused for a moment, Grimm's eyes suddenly lit up while he was fleeing at high speed 30 meters away. A layer of invisible flames wrapped around his body. Garo, who had been bombarded by Grimm's berserk fireballs more than 10 times and remained unscathed, let out a loud roar as the tremendous force around his body shook and shattered the layer of transparent flames. From a moment the transparent flames appeared to the moment they were shattered, no more than 2 fingers had passed. But when shattered face Gallo staggered out of the flames, half of his body had already turned black and charred, as if the magic resistance he had been so proud of had suddenly disappeared. This isn't holy light," asked an old voice in astonishment in a secret chamber at the top level of Kesslin Castle in the distant sorcerer world. "It's not holy light. In my opinion, this should be holy fire formed by fusing some of the power of holy light with it." Another equally old voice sighed in a low voice. "It already has a hint of the law of fire, but he clearly isn't proficient enough in controlling this kind of law of fire. As long as he doesn't lock onto his position, it'll be difficult for this kind of transparent flame, which relies on vision and activates slowly, to hurt him." Yet another crisp female voice suddenly interjected. "That's right, you might be right. But this is his first time coming into contact with the law of fire. Will Garo still be able to keep his cool?" Ignoring the various thoughts of these grade 4 sorcerers in the distant sorcerer world, Shattered Face Gallo couldn't help but feel panic and fear in the battlefield. For a long time, he had relied on his violent strength and astonishing resistance of the undead spirit body to run amok. With them, even a grade 3 elemental sorcerer's attack would only cause negligible damage to him. But now, he was like a warrior who had been hiding in a thick and sturdy armor for a long time. Suddenly, the armor disappeared. Not only did it deal a heavy blow to him, but it also destroyed his psychological line of defense. Shattered Face Gallo was wearing an extremely rare spell tool, a sun vine that could absorb light elemental damage. However, that layer of transparent flame was clearly not a light elemental spell, but a fire spell. With Shattered Face Gallo's undead body's resistance to fire, even if it wasn't at the level of immunity to fire, it wasn't far from it. How was it possible for such a transparent flame to burn through the surface of his skin? This was completely out of Garo's expectations. It was precisely because he had been too confident in his magic resistance that he had hesitated for half a second, allowing the transparent flame to be activated. These 2 seconds of burning had successfully burned away Garo's confidence, and he no longer dared to let the legendary fire Magus attack him as he pleased. With his apprehension and hesitation, Garo no longer pursued the fire Magus like before. He dodged and countered the attacks of the fire magi and elemental magic equipment, while taking large strides to catch up to Grimm. This way, the chances of him catching up to Grimm's swift figure were even lower. Grimm was fleeing at high speed. In that instant, he had successfully activated the new fire spell that the AI chip had simulated, Primal Fire. This was a law of fire that could ignore magic resistance and defensive spells. Originally, Shifeng had only been able to truly grasp this law of fire after reaching Tier 4. However, with the help of the Grade 4 Sadong Divine Ring and a series of complicated energy conversion, he finally had a chance of successfully activating it. Unfortunately, the moment the Primal Fire spell succeeded, half of the Balrog's heart in Grimm's chest had been charred. After all, the Balrog's heart was a Grade 2 demon's heart that Grimm had transplanted into his body when he was still a low-ranked demon. Over the years, the Balrog's heart had provided Grimm with an endless supply of fire energy, allowing him to defeat powerful enemies time and time again. However, as Grimm progressed to the peak of Grade 3, not only was the Grade 2 Balrog's heart no longer a powerful ally, it had even become a hindrance to his progress. Just like in that instant, when the primal fire spell demanded the violent fire energy. However, the sudden burst of flames had exceeded the limits of the Balrog's heart, and Grimm had suffered a backlash from his own power, causing half of his body to be charred. If Grimm's body was compared to a wooden barrel, the wooden plank of the Balrog's heart would become a shortboard, hindering Grimm's explosive power from time to time. Once the fire energy in Grimm's body exceeded a certain level, not only would it harm his enemies, but it would also damage his own body that was not up to the standard. At this moment, Grimm strongly felt that his body needed to undergo some changes. However, no matter how anxious he was, that was a matter for after the battle. Grimm still had to deal with the troublesome, face-shattering Garo seriously. Chapter 10:47. A battle between high-ranked magi could no longer be compared to the killing techniques and killing experience of regular creatures. A battle between regular creatures was just a contest of brute force and technique. Between high-ranked magi, however, it was a contest of strength, technique, agility, vitality, spiritual force, and intuition. During battle, high-ranked magi would naturally form a defensive force field with their large amounts of energy, isolating them from external senses and probing. However, as long as their bodies and spiritual force were still in contact with the outside world, it was unavoidable that their opponent would be able to detect their intentions through the slight changes in energy in the outside world. When the spiritual force of both sides locked onto each other, the factors that would affect the outcome of the battle had expanded from pure strength and battle prowess to the environment, the composition of power, and the way they used it. Even the slightest change in the environment, or the mood during the battle, could affect the final outcome of the battle. Once one was suppressed in a battle between high-ranked magi, if one was unable to change the tides of the battle, defeat would become a very likely thing. It had to be said that although the continuous attacks from the poison corpses for 2 days and 2 nights did not cause any physical or spiritual damage, it had greatly depleted his will to fight. In the subsequent close combat with Grimm, the appearance of the primordial flame was the last straw that broke the camel's back. At the very least, in terms of his will to fight and his desire for victory, his mental state had been completely suppressed. Asterisk, whoosh. Asterisk, the demonic sword whistled through the air as it slashed past Grimm's waist. Where the power had dissipated, an obvious defect had appeared on the flaming body's waist. This defect could not be repaired even if Grimm frantically circulated his fire energy. At the very least, he would not be able to repair it in this battle. Seriously speaking, the demonic sword in face-shattering Garo's hand was even more terrifying than him. At the very least, this attack contained a trace of the power of loss. The source of this power was the demonic sword itself. Taking advantage of the moment when the demonic sword missed, Grimm quickly waved his hands about 10 meters away from Garo, gathering a shockingly high amount of energy into his opponent's chest. In the AI chip's elemental vision, there were 3 areas on face-shattering Garo's body that had an astonishing amount of energy. They were his heart, spine, and right hand. Not only were the energy reactions in these areas astonishingly strong, but even the energy aura was slightly different from other areas. Combined with the personal information obtained from the association, Facebreaker Jia Lu had once accidentally killed a king of souls in the world of souls. Grimm had reason to believe that the other party had used the remains of the Necro Monarch to modify his body. The 3 areas with high magic power should be the Necro Monarch skeleton that he had obtained. His heart provided him with an endless supply of deathly aura, and his spine was the true source of his super high vitality. As for his right hand, Grimm was shocked to find that the energy flowing from it was exactly the same as the demonic sword in his hand. The demon sword had grown out of his right hand, and was not just a simple magic weapon. It was because of this shocking discovery that Grimm and the elemental equipment focused all their attacks on Broken Face Galer's heart. However, due to the other party's strong physique and strong magic resistance. The two of them had not been able to break through the skin on the chest of the shade-broken face Jia Luo to damage the flesh and organs below. If they could, Face-breaker Jia Lu seemed to have realized their intentions, so he diverted a part of his attention to take care of his heart, which was being ravaged by Foot's Soft. Faced with the elemental magic machine's magic ray that was shot every 7 seconds, Face Smasher Jia Lu had gone from ignoring it to being cautious. All the magic rays would be destroyed by Face Breaker Jia Lu's demonic sword, and he even used other parts of his body to block the attack on his heart. The magic ray cannons were powerful, but they were still thousands of meters away. This insignificant distance was enough for Face Breaker Jia Lu to react, and he used his own method to deal with the annoying magic rays. Face Breaker Jia Lu had no choice but to take the risk himself. He suddenly rushed to the side of Face Breaker Jia Lu and repeatedly used the violent high-temperature flames to wash over the same part of his body. In the past, Grimm liked to use fixed modes of fire spells in battle, whether it was the Berserk Fireball, the Molten World, or the improved Flaming Storm. However, in a battle between high-grade wizards, both sides were constantly in a flashing and wandering process. This kind of solid-state witchcraft that required chanting, hand gestures, and elemental shaping was a bit clumsy. Whether it was in a race against time to escape or in a frenzied pursuit, Grimm did not have enough time to stop and cast these solid spells. In that time, the enemy would either be right in front of him or would have escaped far away. No matter what happened, it was not good news for Grimm. That was why, after experiencing a series of high-rank battles, Grimm had figured out this method of battle with the help of the AI chip. He could directly control the fire elements. Without the fixed molding process of the fire spell model, he could save a lot of time to cast spells, which allowed Grimm to quickly deal fire damage to his enemies. However, there were pros and cons to this. Without the constraints of the fixed model, Grimm would need to focus on controlling the violent and active fire elements, as well as having an extraordinary affinity with the fire elements, to form a high-temperature stream of flames. This would also increase the rate at which Grimm's spiritual force was consumed. In the process of controlling the high-temperature stream of flames, if something went wrong with his spiritual force, the fire elemental particles would collide with each other and cancel each other out. At that time, let alone hurting his enemies, even Grimm would have to bear a certain degree of recoil from the flames. Therefore, directly controlling the fire elemental particles required an extremely high affinity with the fire elemental particles, a high consumption of spiritual force, and a high level of skill in controlling the flames. If he lacked any of these three, he would not be able to do it. However, since Grimm dared to use this method, it meant that he was very confident. Grimm walked leisurely, as if he was taking a stroll in the park. His fingers were constantly gesturing and dancing. Every movement of his limbs would draw violent and ferocious flame energy from the surrounding void, and then quickly gather it around his body, turning into streams of scarlet red and almost white flames. As he flashed and danced, they gradually compressed and condensed into a terrifying torrent with an astonishing aura. A flaming storm that could destroy everything lingered around Grimm and danced with him, constantly blowing at Jia Lu's body from all angles. No matter how Jia Lu moved, or how he used his limbs, or the demon sword to block, he could not stop the terrifying torrent of energy that bypassed all obstacles like a stream and blew at Jia Lu's chest. A bowl-sized hole was burnt through the leather armor on Jia Lu's chest. The dark purple skin below was roasted red and hot, and under the continuous impact of the flames, it became redder and hotter. When Jia Luo realized that he could no longer block his opponent's attack, he gave up on the pointless defense and focused all his energy on attacking. He danced the terrifying demon sword as if it was flying. Streaks of dazzling sword light crisscrossed and compressed sword chi with astonishing cutting power swept through everything in the surroundings. The mountain of flesh and blood beneath the two were cut by countless sword lights, and purplish-black lines of blood immediately appeared. The berserk force contained within the sword light exploded, and over 100 walls of black blood sprayed out in 100 meters, mixed with countless pieces of flesh and blood. In such a chaotic situation, the space left for Grimm to dodge became smaller and smaller. Grimm had already tried his best to shrink his flaming body, reducing the 5-meter-tall flaming man to a mere 2-meter-tall man. Only by doing this could he retract his strength and avoid being hit by the enemy's powerful attacks. After all, when fighting against a powerful magus like Jia Lu, the larger the body, the greater the area of impact. It was much easier to control the power of a small, yet powerful one. Grimm's red and white, flaming body quickly dodged, and the eyes on his head flickered with a dazzling blue light. He could see everything in the surroundings, including elemental changes. With his extremely fine elemental vision, he could see countless crisscrossing red lines intertwining with each other, stacking on top of each other as they cut towards his body. According to the AI chip's data, the strength of these threads that were imbued with Jia Lu's berserk force were above 600 degrees. With Grimm's current defensive spells, he would not be able to withstand them. Any one of these threads could directly cut through all of Grimm's defensive spells and attack his body. If he was only tangled by one thread, Grimm would only need to suffer a small injury to break free from the opponent's attack. If he was tangled by 2 threads, he would be in danger of losing limbs. If there were 3, the AI chip's feedback was that Grimm's life would be in danger, and the probability was as high as 46%. This was already a very frightening number. Grimm retreated without hesitation. As he retreated, he controlled the terrifying flow of flames to change its direction, colliding with a few threads that were right in front of him. Using the real to attack the weak, using the condensed to fight the loose, the terrifying flame flow was instantly cut into scattered flames by the extremely condensed threads of power. In Grimm's eyes, the threads of power became brighter and brighter. After unleashing such a violent attack in a single breath, even with Facebreaker Gallo's powerful physique, he could not help but pause for a few seconds to stabilize the nearly boiling energy in his body. Only then did he leap up again, chasing after the threads of energy and madly pouncing towards Grimm. Grimm and shattered face Jia Lu stared at each other through the hundreds of threads of power. His body was also retreating rapidly, and as he retreated, he gathered the terrifying flames to slow down the threads of power. Chapter 1048. At Grimm's level, all sorts of support methods were just support. The true deciding factor in a high-ranked battle was still the Magus' own abilities. Seriously speaking, Broken Face Gallo's battle style was similar to that of a Magus who tempered his body. However, his strength was much more abnormal, and his battle style was much more bizarre. After his body had been transformed into a necromancer, Broken Face Gallo no longer had any so-called weak points. Even if his body was heavily injured and damaged by 80%, he would still be able to survive. However, his heart, spine, and right hand were still the most important parts of his body. Once these parts were damaged, it was impossible for him to die, but his battle prowess would definitely be greatly reduced. Hence, when Grimm and the elemental magic equipment focused their attacks on the source of the deathly aura in Broken Face Gallo's body, this fellow with the strange necromancer bloodline finally went berserk. When Broken Face Gallo gave up on defending and focused all his strength on attacking, Grimm immediately felt a heavy pressure as heavy as a mountain. Threads of strength. Broken Face Gallo had condensed his berserk strength and his own spell energy to form threads of strength that crisscrossed as they sliced towards him. Even with Grimm's strength and steadiness, he had to flee at the sight of this. He did not even have the courage to turn around to defend. It was too condensed. Compared to the elemental magi's solid-state spells and Grimm's control over flames, Broken Face Gallo's strength was undoubtedly more condensed and refined. Comparing the two was like comparing a needle to an ostrich egg. The ostrich egg was undoubtedly larger in size and contained more energy. However, if they were to collide head-on, the one that would break in a single blow would definitely be the ostrich egg, whose strength and sturdiness were more dispersed. The reason why Broken Face Gallo was able to condense his strength to such a degree was most likely due to the magic sword in his hand. At least in Grimm's elemental vision, Broken Face Gallo's danger level was far lower than the magic sword in his hand. According to the AI chip's analysis, this magic sword was about to awaken its own consciousness, which was also known as a weapon spirit. Once it awakened successfully, it could become a rank 4 magic weapon in one go, and its power would be even more astonishing. However, right now, it was only a rank 3 magic weapon that could greatly refine its user's strength. Following the extreme urging of face-shattering Garo, streaks of seemingly inconspicuous red threads of power formed a large net and chased after Grimm. Grimm, on the other hand, fled at full speed without hesitation. While fleeing, he commanded the terrifying flames to slow down and obstruct the power threads from approaching. After flying for a full 200 meters, the energy threads could no longer maintain their stable energy structure and form, and began to rapidly disperse and disintegrate. Moreover, the energy waves that were released once again set off a terrifying energy storm in the same place. Grimm, on the other hand, was only brushed by the shock wave of the energy storm, but half of his flame shield had already been destroyed. However, before Grimm could catch his breath, face-smashing Garo roared and charged at him. He launched a torrential barrage of attacks, forcing Grimm into close combat. Thus, the two magi at the peak of rank 3 clashed in such a manner, once again setting off a terrifying energy storm on the battlefield. The battle in the distance was still ongoing. Many magi who were waiting in front of the magic water screen held their breaths with rapt attention, watching this battle between high-level magi with an attitude of reverence. The might of bloodline magi and the ferocity of elemental magi were displayed vividly in this battle. Even the leaders of organizations or factions, the rank 3 magi, were sweating profusely when they thought about themselves and the others. In the region he was in, they were all admired by others. They were the elites among the magi. However, compared to the two magi at the peak of rank 3 on the screen, they were nothing. Their past arrogance and hidden disdain were immediately swept away, and all that was left was the reflection of their narrow-mindedness and ignorance in the past. In one of the secret rooms of the castle, where many people were watching the battle, there were only 2 silver-robed magi. As they watched the battle, they chatted with solemn expressions. "How is it? Can you detect the strength of their attacks?" The other silver-robed magus had a few magic crystals of different colors floating in front of him. They aimed their diamond-shaped tips at the magic water screen, and all sorts of data kept appearing on the surface of the crystal. Most of the data was glaringly red. 760 degrees, 830 degrees, 910 degrees. The silver-robed magus could not help but break out in a cold sweat as he watched the increasing red numbers that were becoming more and more glaring. The people fighting on the screen were only 2 rank 3 magi. Although they were at their peak, they were still rank 3. The terrifying might they could display with just a wave of their hands was gradually approaching the level of a rank 4 magus. Didn't this mean that either one of them had the terrifying strength to challenge a rank 4 magus? Moreover, the shadow of the power of laws could be seen on their bodies. This fully displayed the terrifying potential of the 2 peak grade 3 sorcerers. Even without any external help, there was a high probability that these 2 magi would advance to rank 4 within 100 to 200 years. After all, the power of laws was a mysterious power that only a peak rank 4 magus could possess. With their strength, if they were in our Silver Alliance, they would at least be at the elite rank, right? One of the silver-robed magi could not help but sigh. I'm afraid they're not just at the elite rank. The other silver-robed magus shook his head and said, "If we take into account the trace of power of laws they already possess, I'm afraid that even our core magi might not be able to suppress them." Core magi. The silver-robed magus could not help but be speechless. Within the Silver Alliance, there is a strict division of ranks and strength between magi. Apart from the various silver-robed magi who maintained the internal order of the Silver Alliance, the Silver Alliance also selected a few combat magi to form elite combat squads. Most of them had a status higher than the silver-robed enforcers and silver-robed disciplinary officers. Above the elite magi, the Silver Alliance would also pick out those who were exceptionally talented and had outstanding potential to be brought into the core circle of the Silver Alliance to become true core magi. Their strength was even more shocking, and they were a core force that had maintained a stable structure for the Silver Alliance for hundreds of thousands of years. Strictly speaking, they were actually the candidates for the Tier 4 Magi. Once the Silver Alliance's current rank 4 sorcerers were injured or killed, their power structure would be weakened. The Alliance would spare no expense to nurture a few core sorcerers, allowing them to advance to rank 4 as soon as possible, thus filling the gap in the Alliance's strength. This was the fundamental reason for the existence of this group of core magi. At this moment, the two Tier 2 silver-robed magi in the secret room were obviously law enforcers sent by the Silver Alliance to collect information on the scattered towers. Hence, their evaluation was more objective and fair. Apart from a Silver Alliance, the Northern Witches and Sorcerer Association had also sent their people. The Northern Witches representative was none other than the Tier 2 witch, Nina. As the representative of the Deception Witches stationed in the scattered towers, she naturally had to understand the entire situation in the Central Continent. The main reason why she was so enthusiastic was that it was the Deception Witches' turn to manage the public affairs of the Northern Witches in this century. At the next meeting of the witch leaders, if a witch leader asked about the major events that happened in the Central Continent, as the representative of the family, if she, as the representative of the family, neglected to collect and sort out the information, it would bring shame to the entire Deception Witches. Moreover, she was more familiar with this legendary fire shaman than anyone else. To be honest, she had already interacted with him when he was still a mere Tier 1 magus. He had left a deep impression on her. Nina had even thought of seducing him and turning him into her concubine. However, after Grimm and the newly born leader of the Destiny Witches, Alice, Nina was forced to give up on this passionate idea. She had been upset for a long time because of this. But now, when she saw Grimm's figure on the screen again, he had become a terrifying peak Tier 3 existence that she could only look up to. If this guy advanced further, then wouldn't he be on par with the chief? Thinking of this, Nina's body trembled uncontrollably, and her soul trembled. Damn it, compared to him on the screen, had she been living like a dog all these years? Ignoring Nina's complicated feelings, in another secret room, a middle-aged magus wearing an orthodox magus robe and a pointed hat, with a long staff leaning on the back of the chair beside him, was staring at the screen with a solemn expression. As the battle between the two peak Tier 3 magi on the screen grew fiercer and fiercer, the middle-aged magus's expression became more and more serious. Finally, he took out a clear and pure communication crystal and rubbed it a few times with his right hand. He muttered an incantation that no one could hear, and the crystal ball immediately lit up. I need to get all the information on this legendary fire, Shaman Grimm, immediately. The more detailed the better, and the faster the better. Yes, put him on our observation and contact list. Put him in front of that gallows. After a while, the light from the crystal ball began to dim. Chapter 1049. Go to Hell. With an earth-shattering roar, face-shattering Garo stomped forward with thunderous steps. Black light gathered on the demonic sword in his hand, but he didn't release it, as if he was accumulating power and waiting to kill Grimm in one fell swoop. Grimm's burning body quickly flashed and drifted, trying his best to break free from his opponent's mental lock. He could clearly sense that a cold current was swiftly cruising across the surface of his body. This was the spiritual power projected by the dead fish eyes of his opponent. If Grimm hesitated for a moment, his opponent would lock onto his position, and he would have to face an earth-shattering attack. With face-shattering Garam's 39 points of strength and the strange energy that he had been accumulating for a long time, Grim was not confident that he could successfully escape from his opponent's attack. Therefore, he quickly flashed his body, not giving his opponent a chance to lock onto his position. At the same time, flames gathered in his eyes, turning into two crimson rays that shot towards his opponent. In order to not lose Grim's position, face-shattering Garum could only grit his teeth and endure the two rays of heat. The laser-like rays of heat swept across Garum's body. Wherever they passed, the leather armor was cut open, revealing the dark purple body underneath. The scorching rays swept past, leaving two scorch marks on his exposed skin that were emitting green smoke. Unfortunately, these scorching rays, with an energy intensity of 600 degrees, could only cause this much damage to the surface of Garo's body. If one wanted to break through Garum's defensive force field and damage his internal organs, it would be wishful thinking if one did not have an attack of over 1,000 degrees. Unless Grim could pull the puppet dragon over and use its giant magic cannons to fire at the Galois, he would only be able to inflict some minor injuries to Grim. While face-shattering Garum was chasing after Grim, the elemental magic machine in the distance was also approaching with large strides. The magic ray cannon on its shoulder was constantly bombarding Garum. Unfortunately, it could only cause some minor injuries. It was still difficult for it to truly injure Garum. Face-smashing Jia finally lost his cool after a series of fruitless hunts. The demon sword that he had been accumulating power could not remain in this state forever. Thus, after chasing for 1,000 meters, face-smashing Jia roared. The demon sword in his hand drew an arc in the air at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye, shooting out a colorless and transparent sharp sword chi. The so-called sword aura was actually air compressed by a violent force, mixed with a strange energy of unknown attributes. Thus, it formed a strange attack that even Grim was extremely wary of, threads of power. Seeing the sword chi rushing towards him, Grim let out a strange cry. His entire body suddenly exploded, dispersing into a large mass of flames that shot in different directions. The sword chi whistled through the fire clouds, sweeping away and annihilating part of the flame energy. When Grim condensed his body of flame 300 meters away, there was an obvious defect on his 2-meter-tall body. Even after summoning the flame energy twice, he was still unable to repair this defect. Grim could only silently accept this reality. Beep. Body damaged by 5, 17%. Energy consumed by 9, 36%. Strength weakened by 3%. Warning a host, when strength weakened by 28%, host chances of defeating the opponent are 0. The A.I. chip's feedback was far more accurate than Grim's estimations, but the information revealed by the A.I. chip gave Grim a headache. Explosive fireball. Taking advantage of the enemy's attack to increase the distance between them, Grim did not hesitate to cast a few fire spells in succession. One after another, fire witchcraft flew over a distance of several hundred meters and engulfed Garo's body in the violent and ferocious flames. When Jia Luo charged out of the explosive fireball with a roar, there were many scorch marks on his body from a scorching heat. The leather armor on his body had been burnt to a pitch-black carbide that was difficult to discern, barely sticking to the surface of his body. Black flames. Execute. Face-smashing Jia Luo roared crazily once more. Following his roar, the magic sword in his hand slashed down at Grim's head from a distance. 400 meters away, Grim felt his body of flame tighten, and his spiritual world went into a trance. He was clearly 400 meters away from him, but deep in his heart, he suddenly felt that his opponent's sword would definitely cut him. If not for his experience exploring Phalar, Grim would definitely have fallen into this trap while he was in a trance. However, after encountering that strange demigod longbow in Phalar, Grim immediately understood what the strange law of Jia Luo's sword was. Damn it, it's a sure hit again. With his previous experience, Grim immediately came up with a solution. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, Grim summoned a Grade 1 fire spirit with a puppet core and instantly switched positions with it. As a result, when the face-shattering Gera demonic sword slashed down from afar, the Grade 1 fire spirit that had replaced Grim suddenly had a black mark on its body. Then, a berserk energy erupted, completely destroying its body and its demon puppet crystal core. Having escaped death, Grim was greatly shocked. He no longer dared to allow face-smashing Jia Luo to attack as he wished. Taking advantage of the moment his opponent's ferocious attack paused, Grim roared angrily. His eyes locked onto Jia Luo's body, and he used all his strength to activate the strange spell that contained a trace of the law of fire, primal flame. Hundreds of meters away, face-smashing Jia Luo was still in the position of slashing down with all his might. Before he could straighten his body, the elemental energy around him vibrated, and a formless, transparent flame spread out from the void, quickly wrapping around him. This was a strange flame that came directly from the source of the law of fire, and it had the strange property of ignoring magic resistance. Therefore, although the flame was not fierce and did not have any special effects, it still caused a terrifying amount of damage to face-smashing Jia Luo. At this moment, he was no longer a peak grade 3 magus with super strong magic resistance. He had suddenly become a normal person, facing the primal flame that spread from inside to outside of his body. Face-smashing Jia Luo finally felt the approach of death for the first time. Last time, before the primal flame attack could even take shape, it was dispersed by his violent strength. Even so, he still suffered a lot of damage from the flame. This time, due to the energy recoil from the black flame execution, he could not immediately escape or disperse the primal flame attack. Therefore, only 2 seconds of burning caused him to suffer the most damage since the start of the battle. And the damage this time was more than the total damage he had received in the past 10 days. When face-smashing Jia Luo once again struggled out of the flames, he had completely turned into a black man. Almost every inch of his body, from the inside to the outside, was burnt to a crisp. His skin cracked, and hot steam rose from within. After staggering a few steps, face-smashing Jia Luo knelt on the ground, no longer able to stand up with his own strength. Stop fighting! Stop fighting! I admit defeat. Jia Luo, who no longer looked like a human, shouted loudly. He took out the teleportation crystal from his storage ring and threw it on the ground. A few hundred meters away, Grim stood silently. The raging flames gradually retreated from his body, revealing his tall and sturdy figure. His eyes were tightly shut, and 2 lines of black blood flowed out and slowly flowed down his face. It was obvious that the short 2 seconds of primal flame attack had put a lot of pressure on Grim. His eyes, which he used to launch the attack, had also suffered from the recoil. Face-smashing Jia Luo, who had already surrendered, was seriously injured, but with the help of his super strong vitality, his body was quickly recovering. Seeing that Grim was no longer able to fight, face-smashing Jia Luo gritted his teeth, and his scorched body looked like it was about to stand up again. But just as he was about to move, there was a loud bang, and the ground around him was blasted by a mana ray, creating a large pit more than a meter deep and 4 to 5 meters wide. Immediately after, the elemental magic machine appeared at the edge of the battlefield with heavy steps. Face-smashing Jia Luo sighed silently, completely giving up on the idea of fighting again. If he was in perfect condition, this advanced grade 3 elemental magic machine would be nothing in his eyes. However, now that he and the legendary fire wizard were both injured, a single advanced grade 3 elemental magic machine was enough to change the situation. Ripples suddenly appeared in the void, and an elderly wizard suddenly appeared on the scene. Both of them were blind, but they could still quickly discern the identity of a newcomer by relying on their mental perception. It was Wizard Fred, the head of the Scattered Tower Forest Association. Very good. As expected of the cream of the crop from the continent's central continent. Your strength is befitting of your status. All right, the winner of this competition has been decided. It's Grim. You can go back with me now. With that, 3 beams of white light shot out from Wizard Fred's hand towards Grim, Jialuo, and the elemental magic machine. The two of them shook their minds, and after confirming the nature of the white light, they let it hit their bodies without any reaction. The moment the white light entered their bodies, the 3 people's bodies began to fade before disappearing without a sound. After sending off the 3 of them, Wizard Fred turned his head towards the southeast, and a hint of anger finally emerged in his calm eyes. He reached out his hand and made a grabbing motion. Thousands of beams of white light quickly gathered in front of him, and then condensed into a strange boy with light green skin that was more than a meter tall. The boy was obviously not prepared for this change. He was so scared that he spat out a mouthful of poisonous gas on Wizard Fred's face. Little brat, behave yourself. If you dare to act recklessly again, I'll crush you." Wizard Fred reached out his hand and grabbed Remy, who was trying to escape with the poisonous gas, back. He held him in front of his eyes and threatened him. It was his idea to arrange the battle in Gordon Highland, but he never thought that this small mistake would cause a grand duchy in the Blue Sea Plain to suffer such a terrible disaster. After all, this was the property of the association. Losing even a little bit of it would be enough to make Fred's heart ache. However, this was a fair battle arranged by the association, and the Plague Corps was also a part of the wizard's personal strength. Therefore, even if Remy had destroyed the Blue Sea Plain to such an extent, Fred could not do anything about it. All he could do was give a verbal warning to vent his anger. Chapter 1050. Curseland Castle was now a sea of celebration. Although there was only one winner in the tournament, Grim, the many magi who had traveled thousands of miles to get here were still very excited. After all, according to the rewards announced by the association, the chances of the winner advancing to rank 4 was almost 100%. Therefore, they were not celebrating the victory of the tournament, but congratulating the Scattered Tower Forest for the birth of a new Tier 4 sorcerer. Moreover, it was a powerful legendary sorcerer. This also meant that the Scattered Towers were going to become even stronger. Disregarding the scheming of the upper echelons of the association, the more powerful the Scattered Towers were, the higher their status would rise. This would also give them more confidence when it came to trading with the other 3 major sorcerer organizations. Otherwise, the Magi of the Central Continent would always feel inferior when dealing with the 3 major Magi organizations. This was obviously a pain in the hearts of the Magi of the Central Continent. As the final winner of the tournament, Grimm's Crimson family became the future aristocratic family that many Magi wanted to pay a visit to. Grim had been injured in the battle, so he hid in a secret room and was carefully treated by Amelia. Hence, the task of receiving the many visitors was handed over to Mary and Winley. Mary was still a Tier 3 sorcerer after all. She took out her identity and put on airs, politely and courteously dealing with the leaders and representatives of different sorcerer families and organizations. Even though Winley was only a Grade 2 Magus, she had no choice but to follow Mary's example and greet one Magus after another politely. Most of the Magi she met were Grade 3 Magi. As for those who wanted to form an alliance or join them, the two could only politely say that they needed to wait for the head of the family to come out of seclusion before they could make a decision. Only then did they send them away. As for those who offered gifts to express their goodwill, the two ladies naturally accepted them happily and noted down the names of their clans and visitors. Although most wizards were eccentric and difficult to deal with, none of the Grade 3 wizards dared to give her a hard time, even if it was the Grade 2 Winley who received them. For the next few days, Winley, who had the mentality of a little girl, was so happy that she could die. In just a few days, she had become acquainted with almost all the Tier 3 wizards in the Central Continent, and every single one of them was unusually polite to her. Not to mention anything else, Tier 1 and 2 accessories, as well as some strange items that she had only seen in books, were also casually given to her, causing her small storage ring to almost burst. Ignoring Winley, who was immersed in simple happiness, Grim was hiding in a secret chamber, lying on a stone bed, silently enduring the healing from Amelia's green light wave. Amelia was originally a plant-type talent, and later on, she fused with the soul of the mysterious princess spore, so her affinity with plants was even higher. Moreover, the plant magic was recognized as the most gentle among all the healing spells, and it had the least side effects. Therefore, under the repeated treatment of the green light waves, the injuries in Grimm's eyes had stabilized. Lying on the stone bed, Grimm could feel the cool life particles seeping into his eye sockets, soothing his scorched and cracked eyeballs. He could finally put down all his worries and slowly fell asleep. In a corner of the secret chamber, the bored Remy was counting his fingers and guarding the place with his elemental magic machinery. After all, Amelia was not Mary or Alice, so even if she showed enough loyalty, Grimm would not put his safety in her hands. He slept for 2 whole days. When Grimm woke up in a refreshed state, his damaged eyeball had completely recovered. He could no longer feel the slightest sign of injury. After all, the primordial flame was a type of law fire. Although the law of fire contained within it was weak and low-end, it was still not something that Grimm's fragile eyeballs could withstand. Using his eyes as a guide, Grimm injected the primordial flame into Facebreaker Galer's body. At that moment, his eyes became the bridge and hub for the primordial flame. This kind of law fire was a great deal of damage to his enemies, but it was also a heavy burden to Grimm, who did not have the slightest bit of law power to protect himself. Hence, his eyes could not withstand the pressure for more than 2 seconds before they were burnt into glassy black crystals. If not for Grimm's body of fire, which could nullify most fire damage, his body would have been burnt to a crisp as well. Although he had suffered such a huge backlash, Grimm was still overjoyed. The success of the primordial flame proved that the AI chip's deduction of the laws of fire was correct. As long as Grimm followed this correct path, advancing to rank 4 or taking that crucial step was not just a dream, but a reality that could be realized. However, this battle also allowed Grimm to recognize some of the problems with his body. The problems were the inferior bloodline and the weakness of his body. It could be said that without the help of the AI chip and these fortuitous encounters, with Grimm's talent as a magus and his human bloodline, rank 3 would be the limit of his potential. It would be impossible for him to advance any further. Even with the AI chip and the primordial flame, advancing to rank 4 would exhaust the potential of his soul, and he would lose the motivation to continue advancing. Laws. Even if the AI chip analyzed all the laws of the Magus world and placed them in front of him, would his weak soul and body be able to support even greater and more terrifying power? What were laws? At the end of the day, laws were about using one's body as a fulcrum and one's spiritual force as a crowbar, using one's insignificant and weak strength to pry open the laws of the entire world. From there, one would be able to obtain strength that was tens or even hundreds of times greater than before. And this kind of power was something that could never be achieved by relying on one's own hard work of meditation or cultivation. Just like a human stomach, it could only hold a certain amount of food. Once this limit was exceeded, no matter how exquisite the food was or how nutritious it was, one could not continue to eat it forever. Hence, the energy system of a human was similar to a human stomach. There was a limit to what it could hold, and digestion and absorption were slow. Under such circumstances, in a fair competition, humans would never be able to match up to wild magical beasts. Hence, it had to be said that humans had learned from the natural world's magical beasts and learned how to draw magic patterns. This was a miraculous step that could be said to be a stroke of genius. This allowed humans to take a shortcut midway, leaping above wild magical beasts and giving birth to the strange and demonic branch of magi. However, no matter how much human magi evolved and became stronger, they were limited by their inferior bloodlines and short lifespans. They could only be called kings within the plane, and could never be compared to the tyrannical races that transcended the plane. This continued until human magi grasped the power of laws. The power of laws was like an unparalleled godly weapon in the hands of human magi. This allowed their weak bodies and inferior bloodlines to burst forth with astonishing power. It was the emergence of the power of laws that allowed magi to truly stand at the peak of the plane, becoming powerful beings that could be mentioned in the same breath as the gods, dragons, titans, and lords of calamity. However, what restricted magi from comprehending and grasping the power of laws was not others, but their own bloodlines and innate talents. Take the Titans, for example. They were powerful beings that were born from the will of the multiverse. Just like human wizards, if one wanted to become a wizard in one fell swoop, they would need to go through layers of selection and screening, and then go through a bloody and cruel elimination. Only through hard meditation and years of hard work could one be lucky enough to become a wizard. However, the Titans did not need that. Even if they were just young Titans, breathing in and out magic energy had become a racial talent that was etched into their souls and instincts since they were born. While human magi were still working hard day and night to accumulate magic energy through meditation, the Titans were already breathing in and out the magic energy in the environment as if they were breathing. While human magi were still struggling with the advancement system, the Titans only needed to search for magic energy as food to grow stronger step by step. From there, they would become powerful existences that human magi could not hope to reach. The most fundamental reason why the development of both sides was so disproportionate was that their bloodlines were different and their racial talents were different. That was why Grimm could only understand how difficult it was for a wizard to progress to his current level. Hence, Grimm had a strange desire to improve or change the foundation of his bloodline. The astral beast bloodline that he had obtained from Envik's plane was undoubtedly an opportunity to change this. Apart from improving his bloodline, Grimm also found that there were many areas that could be improved on in his body. First of all, the grade 2 heart of the Balrog was no longer suitable for him. In the battle between the strong, not only did the grade 2 heart of the Balrog not help him, it had also severely hindered his ability to unleash his power. Hence, he had to remove it as soon as possible and create a heart that was compatible with the power of fire. This was the right way to continue strengthening himself. Secondly, the equipment that he was currently using was either the flame set equipment that he had forged when he was at grade 2, or some miscellaneous equipment that he had obtained from another plane. Although they could still assist him in unleashing powerful combat power, they were not compatible with his natural talent. In other words, they could only be used as temporary equipment. If he wanted to continue growing, he would need to find some fire attribute equipment that was compatible with his soul. After thinking about it for a while, Grimm used this period of thinking to sort out the next few things that he needed to do in his mind in order. Chapter 1051. Soon enough, Grimm met with President Fred in Cursling Castle. There were 3 other grade 4 magi with him, and one of them was Elder Nicholas, who Grimm had met before. Of the remaining 2, one was a middle-aged female, magus called Clara. She was the current head of the Ranner family that Shattered Face Garrow belonged to. The other was a male, magus, who looked like a pedant. He was called Merva, and he was the vice president of the association. Under the witness of the 3-tier 4 sorcerers, President Fred softly chanted a mysterious and strange witchcraft incantation. As the incantation sounded, a large cloud of black smoke emerged from the surrounding walls, floor, and ceiling. It gathered in front of Grimm, forming a mysterious contract with golden words on a black background. The material of the contract was formed from the mysterious black smoke, but the dazzling golden light on it was blurry. When Grimm slowly extended his spiritual force into it, a contract with terrifying binding force appeared in his mind. Beep. Ancient contract fragment detected. Once the host imprints their soul on the contract, they will be bound by the contract along with other souls. This contract does not have a soul holder and is classified as a mutual benefit contract. As long as the host does not violate the agreement of all soul imprints, their souls will not be harmed. After inspection, 3 oral agreements have been found on the ancient contract fragment. The contents are as follows. 1. This contract is a mutual agreement between all grade 4 magi in the central continent's Talon region. All participants of the contract are not allowed to attack each other or harm each other's interests. Violators of this contract will have their souls demoted. 2. Those who join the contract must protect the interests of all magi in the Talon region. Under the condition that their safety and interests are not threatened, they must listen to the scattered Talon Association's orders and resist the infiltration or invasion of foreign organizations. 3. Those who join the contract for the first time will be forced to carry out a mission assigned by all participants of the contract. If you refuse this mission, it will be considered as refusing to serve the scattered Talon Association, and you will be expelled by all participants of the contract. Grimm narrowed his eyes and silently pondered over the contract before him. He vaguely understood something. Strictly speaking, this contract was to gather all the high-ranked magi in the central continent, mainly grade 4, together to resist the invasion and infiltration of the 3 great Magus organizations. In essence, it was a good thing for the scattered Tower Forest. At the very least, with the restriction of this contract, the various magi wars in the central continent would not spread to the level of rank 4. Without the participation of Tier 4 sorcerers, the intensity of the Sorcerer War would become more controllable. It would not lead to all sorts of terrifying death zones or endless wars in the central continent. Of course, the higher-ups of the association were not stupid enough to ban all levels of war. After all, a certain degree of competition between magi could better nurture and screen out more powerful magi. At the same time, it was also part of the internal competition mechanism of survival of the fittest. Therefore, the association only forbade conflicts between rank 4 sorcerers. As for those below grade 4, as long as this kind of competition did not affect the operation of the entire Magus system, the association would not stop those small-scale Magus family wars. Instead, they would be happy to see it happen. This was the only way for the rising and powerful sorcerers to absorb the nourishment of the losers and reach the peak step by step. From this point of view, Grimm and the Crimson family he established were the beneficiaries of this relaxed policy. After reading through the entire contract, Grimm understood it very well. The association's restrictions on rank 4 sorcerers were very lax. After all the rank 4 sorcerers of the central continent had joined together to form this association. Their goal was to protect each other and defend against the infiltration of the 3 surrounding Magus organizations. It was not to tie themselves up. Therefore, other than the compulsory mission when he first joined, once Grimm became a rank 4 elder of the association, he would naturally have a lot of say in the development of the Scattered Tower Forest region. However, the association's restrictions on him were few and far between. All rank 4 elders of the association had the right to propose a proposal. When there was an important matter or topic, the president would usually gather everyone to discuss it and vote on it. There were currently 14 rank 4 sorcerers in the association. Apart from the president, Wizard Fred, who had 2 votes, the other rank 4 sorcerers each had 1 vote. Only 1 vote was needed to propose a proposal, but more than half of the votes were needed to reject it. Therefore, within the association, as long as more than half of the elders did not object, any rank 4 elders could be implemented without any obstruction. This was probably the main reason why all the rank 4 sorcerers in the central continent were willing to join the Scattered Tower Forest Association. I'm still at rank 3. Grimm raised his head and looked at President Fred, who was staring at him, and asked in confusion. The contract in front of him was obviously for rank 4 sorcerers, and he was only a rank 3 sorcerer. Since the association wanted him to sign this contract so urgently, there must be a big problem. You'll be a rank 4 sorcerer very soon. President Fred looked at him with a smile. I have faith in you. Grimm was still hesitant. The black-mouthed, black-faced elder Nicholas said coldly, What? You want to reject this contract? I'm warning you. Think carefully about the consequences of rejecting this contract. President Fred smiled and waved his hand at Elder Nicholas. Don't scare him. Sir Grim will definitely make a wise decision. When he said the word wise, President Fred's tone was obviously a little heavier. However, when Grim saw the benevolent smile on President Fred's face, he really wanted to throw a fireball at his face. It was just a red face and a black face. While Grim was still hesitating, a familiar female voice clearly sounded in his mind. "Sign it. I'll explain it to you later." It was Alice's voice. The moment Alice's voice sounded, President Fred, who was standing opposite Grim, seemed to have sensed something. He abruptly raised his head and looked towards the north. Grim no longer hesitated. He stretched out his right index finger, condensed a small bright yellow flame, and gently pressed it on the mysterious contract. The moment the flame touched the contract, Grim's name appeared strangely on it in the sorcerer's common language, and the contract exploded into a boundless black fog that merged with the surrounding air. Grim could sense that the mysterious contract did not dissipate, but was directly stored in the core of the awakened consciousness in Kesslin Castle. Seeing Grim sign the contract, the faces of the rank 4 sorcerers in front of them instantly brightened. As witnesses, Sorceress Clara and Elder Nicholas nodded and smiled at Grim, congratulating him before silently disappearing. Soon, only Grim, Fred, and Merva were left in the secret room. Although Grim was not yet a rank 4 magus, the two magi were all smiles, as if they were treating him as someone of the same rank. "Here, this is the reward you deserve." The magic ring that President Fred tossed over was a unique and exquisite design. On the surface of the ring, the emblem of the Scattered Tower Forest Association was inlaid with small fire diamonds. "This is your Elder's Ring. With it, you will have the right to enter and exit Kesslin Castle freely. At the same time, you will also be able to use the Magus troops in the association. There's also a small storage space within the ring. The 500 Sith origin substance promised to you is already in there." Even with Grim's calm temperament, he could not help but tremble the moment he caught the ring. After all, the authority and will that this ring represented in the Central Continent was extremely heavy, and its weight was definitely above that of most Magus clans. To put it bluntly, if Grim swore to destroy a Magus clan with this ring, he would not even need to do it himself. Plenty of Magus organizations would be willing to do it for him. After all, there were thousands of Magus clans in the Central Continent, but there were only 14 rank 4 magi. It was obvious who was more important between the two sides. Don't be too happy just yet. Before you become a rank 4 magus, your authority as an elder will be temporarily frozen. Only when you truly become a rank 4 magus will everything officially belong to you. But I believe that day won't be long. A strange smile appeared on President Fred's face. Also, if I were you, I would directly teleport back to the Crimson family and not take a step out until I reach rank 4. Do you know how tempting this origin substance is to a rank 3 sorcerer? The extreme temptation will make countless people take the risk. The blazing flame monarch. As the light from the teleportation slowly dissipated, Gargamel, who had undergone a huge transformation, stood at the entrance of the teleportation room and bowed respectfully. "Welcome back, Lord Patriarch." The news from afar had long since reached the Crimson family. At this moment, the entire Crimson family was in an uproar. There were people celebrating everywhere. So, as the head butler of the Crimson family, Gargamel's tone was filled with boundless joy and excitement. All right. Stop playing around with these empty things. The Lord Patriarch you're waiting for has not returned. It's us who have returned." Hearing that familiar voice, Gargamel suddenly raised his head and awkwardly discovered that there were only 3 girls standing in the teleportation formation. Grim's figure was nowhere to be seen. "Ma, Lady Mary, where's the Patriarch?" I don't care where he went. If you want to wait, then wait here." The moment this was mentioned, Mary was filled with anger and left in a huff. "Lord Gargamel, you can slowly wait here." Winley was obviously in a good mood, smiling as she left. Seeing that her father was at a loss, Amelia, who was at the back, pulled on Gargamel's sleeve and whispered into his ear, "The Patriarch has gone to the Tower of Destiny." Oh. Chapter 1052. When Grimm arrived at the Tower of Destiny, a large-scale astrology ceremony had just ended. Led by a dozen witches of destiny, hundreds of apprentices left the astrology hall in an orderly manner, leaving the vast space to a young man and a young woman. Before leaving, the group of apprentices, whose average age was only 15 years old, curiously looked at the young wizard who had captured the heart of their faction leader. Although their hearts were burning with the flames of gossip in such a solemn place, they couldn't help but chatter endlessly. After all the apprentices and witches had left the hall and the astrology platform, Alice walked towards Grimm, who was waiting at the edge of the platform. Although the ceremony had ended, the illumination stones around the astrology hall were not lit. The hall was dark and deep, and the ceiling above them had become completely transparent, reflecting the dark sky outside. Countless dazzling stars lit up the sky, flashing with pure and obscure starlight energy, resonating with the mysterious spell formation etched on the astrology platform. Standing in the middle of the night, under the starlight sprinkled down by the countless stars, Alice was like a goddess descending to the mortal world. Every frown and smile was soul-stirring, and every movement was ethereal. Grimm held his breath, quietly admiring the beautiful scenery in front of him. He was completely intoxicated. Hey, what are you doing? I've been talking to you for a long time. Did you even hear me? Alice said softly, with a coquettish expression on her face. However, when her gaze collided with the burning passion in the man's eyes, Alice's fair and smooth face instantly flushed red. Grimm gently pulled the lithe Alice into his arms, and without saying a word, he found her red lips and happily tasted them. Ugh, after a long time, Alice, who had found an opportunity, used her hand to block Grimm and warned him with a flushed face. Don't mess around. This is the astrology platform. I still have a lot to talk to you about. Grimm laughed heartily and pulled Alice into his arms again. I also have a lot to talk to you about. How about we find a secluded place to talk? Alice's face turned even redder. She placed her hand on Grimm's chest and felt his strong heartbeat and strong muscles. Alice's body couldn't help but start to heat up. Raising her head, she met Grimm's fiery eyes. Alice bit her red lips and glared at him fiercely. Then, she waved her hand, and with a flicker of light, the two of them disappeared on the spot. After half a day, the two of them finally ended the celebration of their reunion. Their bodies were entangled on the soft bed, and they began to whisper to each other. What do you plan to do with these source substances? Alice was still panting. In terms of physique, even if there were 10 of her, she still wouldn't be able to catch up to Grimm. After this battle, my understanding of the law of fire has deepened. Even without the help of the source substance, it won't be a problem for me to advance to level 4. It'll only take me about 100 years. Grimm lay on the bed, allowing Alice to lie on his chest. He caressed her soft, silky hair with one hand and caressed her smooth back with the other. Mary is a bloodline sorcerer, so her need for source substances is not as strong as yours. So, I'll leave the source substance for you to advance to level 4. You make it sound so good. Alice raised her nose and gently bit the muscles on his chest with her white teeth. You know that we Destiny witches advance by relying on the power of destiny. So what does that have to do with your source substance? What? Are you afraid that I'll be angry if you leave the source substance for Mary? His lie was exposed, but Grimm didn't seem to mind at all. He laughed. You're both women I love, so it doesn't matter who I give it to. Alice continued to joke around with him for a while before propping herself up and using her hands to look at Grimm's face. Ignoring the fact that her breasts were in full view, she said in a serious tone, Grimm, I know that you are confident in reaching the 4th level and want to maximize the effects of the origin substance. But I still have to warn you, these source substances can only be used by you, and you must do it quickly. Grimm rarely saw Alice so serious, so he quickly suppressed the trace of lust that had just arisen and asked with a frown, Why? Because you only have 30 years left to advance to level 4. What will happen in 30 years? A war, an epic war. Alice's sweet and sentimental voice gave Grim a glimpse of a magnificent world that shocked him and made him yearn for it. Morian, a human world dominated by arcanists, was about to leap from a medium-sized plane to a large plane. Once successful, after thousands of years of plane expansion and accumulation of strength, it might have a chance to become a powerful plane like the Sorcerer's World, standing at the peak of the multiverse. But unfortunately, it didn't have the good luck of the Sorcerer's World. The growth and expansion of Morian Plane had undoubtedly alarmed many powerful races in the multiverse. Whether it was the world of gods, the Dragon Plane, or the Disaster Lords, they wouldn't allow a new race to emerge in the multiverse that could compete with them for territory and resources. Therefore, they sent out their strongest and elite troops and began to launch a frenzied attack on Morian Plane. Many arcanists from Morian Plane had also enslaved and ruled hundreds of secondary planes in the past tens of thousands of years, and turned them into peripheral bases to protect the Arcane Kingdom. Countless race masters crossed the distant sea of stars, broke into the secondary planes of the Arcane Kingdom, and launched bloody battles one after another. As the earth cracked and the sky shattered, these secondary planes were successively destroyed in the flames of war. And the Arcanists who had been defeated could only retreat to Morian Plane and use the floating space city and the arcane fortress to form an insurmountable line of defense outside the plane barrier. In the past tens of thousands of years, the Arcane Kingdom had also plundered and enslaved hundreds of large and small planes, collected their resources and treasures into their own plane of origin, and built mysterious devices that could directly absorb the energy of the void. Therefore, the Arcane Kingdom with endless energy was particularly powerful and invincible. If it weren't for the joint attack of many powerful races in the universe, perhaps the Arcane Kingdom could really become the most powerful group of forces in the entire multiverse. Unfortunately, before they could grow strong, the great Arcane Kingdom created by the Arcanists and the great Arcanist was torn to pieces by the swarming enemies. After hundreds of years of war, the line of defense on the periphery of Morian Plane had been fragmented, and the powerful Arcane Kingdom had become a thing of the past, and it could fall completely at any time. In that magnificent planar war, the wizard camp of the extraterritorial realm also joined the battle in the middle and late stages, hoping to accumulate valuable resources and knowledge from the ruins of the collapse of the Arcane Kingdom. At present, this terrible war of destruction was still going on in the depths of the universe. Although the Arcane Kingdom had lost most of its resistance, the remaining power was still not to be underestimated. On the contrary, the major races who had an absolute advantage at this moment had no intention of fighting. They just wanted to capture the most and the largest share of the spoils from the war. Therefore, the powerful gods, the arrogant dragons, and the terrifying lords of disaster had all deployed the elites of their races and forced them into the Morian Plane. On the one hand, they let them wreak havoc everywhere and destroy the mysterious devices that supported the Arcanists to continue to fight from the inside. On the other hand, they robbed the resources and advanced knowledge stored in the various floating space cities of the Arcane Kingdom in advance. And the wizard world was naturally not willing to lag behind. They were ready to send an elite team deep into the enemy's rear, break into the Morian Plane, and join the ranks of the scramble for resources and knowledge. Such a mission behind the enemy's rear was undoubtedly very dangerous. After entering the Morian Plane, the wizards who carried out the mission had to face not only the terrible Arcanists, but also the ferocious allies, whose enemies were unpredictable. It was like thieves who put their hands in the same pocket. In addition to being in the same profession, both sides were also competitors. And among the many competitors, although the wizard camp wasn't the weakest, it was almost the same. Therefore, the great wizards of the extraterrestrial realm also set the level of the wizards who carried out the mission at level 4. After all, level 4 was already the strongest power that could be accommodated inside the plane. If they sent a level 5 wizard in, their power would also be suppressed to level 4, so it was better to directly send a group of level 4 wizards so that there would not be overflow and waste of power. At that time, The extraterrestrial realm would select 10 elite level 4 wizards to serve as the main force of the battle, to carry out the mission assigned by the great wizards. And the several major forces in the wizard world would also select a level 4 wizard to serve as the sentinel of the main force, to confuse the enemy's sight. This also meant that the Silver Alliance, the Northern Witches, the Sorcerer Association, and the Scattered Forest of Towers would all have to elect a level 4 sorcerer to complete this infiltration mission arranged by the great sorcerer of the Outer Realms. It was precisely because the risk of this mission was indescribably high that the 14 level 4 wizards of the Scattered Forest of Towers were obviously unwilling to participate in this suicide mission. Therefore, under their brewing and planning, the unlucky scapegoat, Grim, was born. After listening to Alice's explanation, Grim finally understood the real purpose of the selection of the level 3 strongest. There were no angry roars or curses. Grim's eyebrows were tightly furrowed, and his black eyes seemed indifferent and deep. He began to think calmly and deeply. Alice caressed his determined face with her hand, and could not help but give him a kiss. After a long time, she panted and said in a drunken tone, "Grim, did you know? The most fascinating thing about you is your steadiness and calmness. If it was someone else, they would definitely blame me for making the decision without permission. Only you never lose your cool, and you understand the importance of thinking and thinking. All right, stop keeping me in suspense. Since you took the initiative to push me onto this path, could it be that you found something in advance?" Grim opened his large hands and lightly patted Alice's round and plump butt. Their skin touched, and it felt good to the touch. He could not help but stop there and slowly fondle a need. Alice's body immediately heated up again. Chapter 1053. 3 days later, Grim returned to the Blazing Flame Monarch. Just as President Freed had said, it was not appropriate for him to run around with 500 Sith origin substance on him. In the Central Continent, there were many Magi who had spent hundreds of years but were still stuck at rank 3. When they found out that Grim had the origin substance that could change their fates, many were willing to take the risk. Even though Grim had the support of the Tower Forest Society, this did not stop the Magi, who were close to going crazy in order to advance. During this period, even the Crimson family had to be careful. A few core members of the family lived in seclusion, not stepping out of the Wizard's Pagoda unless there was something important. This was to avoid being held hostage by those crazy fellows who could threaten the family leader. Grim was also forced to use up the origin substance and advance to rank 4, cutting off the thoughts of those crazy and greedy fellows. Otherwise, the Crimson family would never have a day of peace. Hence, once Grim returned to the Blazing Flame Monarch, he locked himself in the secret room on the top floor, cutting off all contact with the outside world. Inside the secret room, Grim sat cross-legged, 5 blood-red crystals floating in front of him. The crystals were the purest, non-elemental diamonds. A strange blood-red energy floated within them. When Grim first saw this blood-red energy, whether it was the flame demon's heart beating in his chest or the soul origin in the depths of his consciousness, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Then, from his limbs, every cell and every piece of flesh a voice surged out. "Swallow it." The voice was very soft and messy at first, but as Grim stared at the blood-red energy for a long time, the voice gradually converged into a terrifying torrent, crazily colliding and roaring in his body. Unbeknownst to him, his right hand actually reached out shakily, slowly grabbing the blood-red crystals. Only when his right hand blocked his line of sight did Grim realize he had lost control of himself. With great willpower, he forcefully retracted his right hand. Such a simple action actually caused Grim, who was at the peak of rank 3, to break out in a cold sweat. Grim looked within himself and found that the AI chip's warning notifications had filled the entire space. Beep, warning, warning. High energy crystal detected. Requesting host's instruction to begin absorption. Beep, strange force field fluctuation detected. Attribute unknown. Source unknown. Effect unknown. Beep. detected that the host is in a state of mental confusion. Please indicate whether or not to proceed with mental interference. A series of warnings were written in bright red words. Unfortunately, Grimm's attention had been completely absorbed by the blood-red energy, so he had turned a deaf ear to the warnings and ignored them. At this moment, Grimm quickly recalled what had happened. He could not help but break out in a cold sweat. That blood-colored energy was probably the origin substance. According to the Magi, they were actually part of the plane's origin that was dispersed from within. They could be said to be the blood that supported the development of a plane and nurtured the growth of new life and materials. In most cases, they were dispersed within the plane, flowing along with the operation of the plane system. Only when the plane system was destroyed and the nomological power dispersed could these plane origins manifest, becoming a strange creation that was between a material and incorporeal body. The plane origins that were captured and absorbed into the high-purity, attributeless diamond crystals were the origin substance that Magi passed down through word of mouth. Of course, even if one did not capture these plane origins, they would naturally fuse with other substances in the plane, producing some contaminated origin substance. The greatest value of these origin substances was the fragments of laws of the plane they contained. Any life form that absorbed the origin substance could comprehend a portion of the laws of the plane. This was undoubtedly a great help to them in comprehending the fundamental laws of the world. The laws of the world and planes had always been hidden from the senses of the beings of the plane, operating silently. Without the help of these fragments, those with inferior talent or a low affinity with the world would never have the chance to touch upon the truth of the world. According to the laws of the world, it was impossible for a plane to give birth to a powerful being that surpassed the laws of the world. However, in the actual operation of any system, there would be more or less mistakes, big or small. If these mistakes could not be corrected, terrifying existences like Magi, gods, and lords of calamity would appear. The reason why the Magus world could produce so many high-ranked Magi and great Magi was because of their opportunistic and ingenious use of the origin substance to surpass the threshold of laws. As for the origin of these origin substances, it was obvious that they came from hostile planes or planes that they had forcibly enslaved and conquered. Many powerful Magi in the Magus world had left their planes, conquering and enslaving countless planes. Only the planes with valuable resources would be preserved, providing the Magi with an endless supply of free slaves and inexhaustible resources. As for the planes that lacked resources or resisted too strongly, they would be selectively destroyed and artificially produced origin substance. Such actions had flourished for a time when the sorcerer world had just risen. However, to avoid attracting the attention of the Titans, the guardians of order in the multiverse, the sorcerers had curbed their actions of destroying planes and seizing the source substance in recent years. It was a pity that Magi were like lords of calamity, abyssal demons, and mind flayers. They were classified as evil by many planes, becoming targets of loathing and disdain. Wizards were born to be a chaotic and evil race. It was said that in the outer realms, the Magi community was divided into many factions. Some helped the Lords of Calamity stir up trouble and wreak havoc in various planes, while others helped the Titans attack the Lords of Calamity and abyssal demons. However, most of them maintain a neutral stance, hiding in their own secret planes and living a peaceful life of research and study. It was precisely because of the restraint of the Magus faction that the origin substance became rarer and rarer, and it became a hot commodity among the Magi community. Under normal circumstances, it would only be traded with great Magi who were at least at rank 4. Only rank 4 Magi who were on good terms with the great Magi or had direct bloodline descendants will be able to obtain even a tiny bit of origin substance. Hence, even in the private treasuries of rank 4 Magi, origin substance was definitely one of the top 3 resources, and it was impossible for them to be taken out to be traded. If not for the fact that they wanted to avoid being chosen as the executors of a sure-death mission, Why would the 14 rank 4 Magi of the Scattered Pagoda Force Association be willing to open their treasury and gather 500 Sith origin substance? A. I. Chip. Search for the method to use origin substance. Beep. A total of 12,682 items and information related to origin substance have been searched in the database. After filtering and filtering, 961 pieces of information have been found that match the host's current rank. The information listed is as follows. As the data flowed into Grimm's mind like a waterfall, he closed his eyes and quickly analyzed the information that the AI chip had sorted out and finally came to a conclusion. There were 3 ways to use origin substance. The first was to swallow it in one gulp, and then try his luck, hoping that he would be able to analyze some information that would be useful to him. This was also the method that most Magi would choose. The second was to use some sort of spell to seal the origin substance in one's body, and then slowly fuse it with one's organs through deep meditation. This way, one would be able to strengthen a special organ that was completely compatible with one's origin. As for the third method, it was similar to the second. However, one would not choose to fuse with an organ, but a specially chosen powerful magic tool. This way, not only would the magic tool be compatible with one's soul, it would also contain a trace of a strange law. Grimm had reason to suspect that the demonic sword in shattered face Jaw Luo's hands had obtained this law. In order to achieve this, Grimm had to first modify his innate bloodline. Only with a powerful innate bloodline could the power of laws brought about by the origin substance be maximized. After understanding all of this, Grimm did not hesitate to put away the 5 origin substances. He then took out a dark blue crystal from his storage ring and fiercely stabbed it into his chest. The dark blue crystal was about the size of a palm and had a diamond-shaped body. Within it was a drop of viscous liquid that emitted a strong glow of energy. With a light kacha sound, cracks appeared on the surface of the crystal. Not a single drop of blood flowed out of the wound on Grimm's chest. Instead, the muscles around the wound began to wriggle and contract. Bright red flesh sprouted, completely covering the entire crystal. These rapidly growing flesh sprouts were like small snakes that crazily wriggled, extending the flesh sprouts into the cracks of the crystal. Countless thin flesh tentacles slowly extended towards the drop of liquid. The moment the flesh tentacles pierced the drop of liquid, Grimm's body trembled and he finally lost control of himself and fell to the ground, howling in pain. In the secret room, apart from Grimm's beast-like howls and roars, there was only the creepy sucking sound that could make one's hair stand on end. Everyone's bloodline talent was something they were born with, and it ran through almost every aspect of the body, spirit, and soul. It could be said to be one of the most basic attributes of humans, and it was very difficult to modify and modify. However, after tens of thousands of years of research, Crazy Magi had managed to develop various methods and techniques to modify and replace their origin bloodline. This had become a way for Magi to strengthen their own battle prowess and widen their path forward. However, no matter how much they improved and strengthened it, a terrifying method like bloodline replacement could only be mastered by a small number of Magi. Chapter 1054. The bloodline replacement could not be done in one go, and the entire process could take months. The drop of liquid stored in the blue crystal was the result of Grimm using the source siphoning bug to devour the corpse of the strange astral beast. He then extracted the complete bloodline power from the bug, and after a series of refinement and purification, he had obtained this drop of blood. Most astral beasts had chaotic constitutions, and they absorbed berserk magic energy that had not been purified or filtered. Hence, they were completely different from beings of other planes. In Grimm's chest, the broken blue crystal had been wrapped up by his flesh and muscles. At this moment, strands of bluish-black fog were emitted from the drop of liquid, which were then absorbed by the fine tendrils that were tightly wrapped around the crystal. This fog that was released slowly flowed, along with the blood flow, to every corner of Grimm's body. Everywhere it went, it would undergo a subtle and mysterious energy exchange with his flesh, tendons, meridians, and organs. Some of the mysterious energy seeped into Grimm's flesh and organs, causing some unpredictable changes. The process of a change was not as peaceful as Grimm's appearance. Grimm lay on the floor, a pained expression flashing across his youthful face from time to time. Parts of his body would twitch and spasm from time to time. However, no matter how intense the pain was, Grimm would not forcefully stop the process. He only relied on the chip's tiny sensory abilities to silently control the bloodline replacement process. In the depths of his mind, a small screen projected a blood-red number. 21%, 22%, 23%. Sometimes the numbers on the screen wouldn't change for days, but sometimes they would change rapidly in a matter of minutes. Every time it changed, it meant that Grimm's body was undergoing earth-shattering changes, and these changes were usually accompanied by unforgettable pain. This could be seen from Grimm's state of mind that was alternating between being awake and in a daze. While Grimm was in seclusion, the Crimson family went into a dormant state. Most of the affairs in the Alobes region were delegated to the nobles of the Crimson dynasty. Apart from a magi of the Crimson family who continued to guard the resource points, the rest returned to the family's headquarters and rarely showed themselves outside. Not only were the members of the Crimson family eagerly anticipating the birth of a new Tier 4 sorcerer, but countless families and organizations in the scattered Tower Forest were also waiting for the final result. The magi and organizations that had offended or attacked the Crimson family in the past were like ants on a hot pan. They were extremely frustrated, but there was nothing they could do. If Grimm really became a Grade 4 sorcerer, the Crimson family wouldn't even need to do anything. Those snobs who wanted to suck up to them would swarm up and use their heads to exchange for a small promise from the Crimson family. At that time, there would be no place for them in the Central Continent. Although every region in the sorcerer world had laws and regulations that forbade internal strife, it was clear that those things could only restrict those low-ranked sorcerers. To a Tier 4 sorcerer who stood at the pinnacle of the sorcerer world, all laws and regulations were ineffective. Only a Tier 4 sorcerer or someone who was as powerful as a Tier 4 sorcerer could make these Tier 4 sorcerers hesitate. However, when the person they were facing was Grimm, which old man in the association would publicly acknowledge him as the most popular person in the association just for the slightest bit of benefit, it could be said that at this moment, Grimm was the darling of all the Tier 4 sorcerers of the association. They couldn't even bear the pain, so why would they find trouble with him at this time? On the contrary, in order to prevent some ignorant people from disturbing Grimm's advancement, the association even secretly deployed 2 elite sorcerer troops to the border of the Alobes region. On one hand, they were protecting Grimm, but on the other hand, they were monitoring and controlling him. On the second day of Grimm's seclusion, the higher-ups of the Crimson family, led by Gargamel and Winley, secretly came to Kesslin Castle and paid a visit to Vice President Merva. The purpose of their visit was simple. It could only be described as extortion. Actually, it wasn't really extortion. After all, it was the association who schemed against Grimm first. If Grimm didn't know the whole story, after he advanced to Tier 4, the association could use the terms of the contract to force Grimm to accept that damn terrifying mission. At that time, it was too sudden, and Grimm had no choice but to accept the reality and step on the path to the plane of death. In this way, the association would be able to resolve this matter with the least amount of effort. Unfortunately, Grimm already knew the whole story. At this moment, the association could no longer pretend to be deaf and mute, hoping that Grimm would swallow this bitter pill and bear all the danger and losses. If the association really angered Grimm, he could delay the time and refuse to advance. At that time, although he would be severely punished by the association could only choose one more Tier 4 sorcerer from the current 14. After all, the Scattered Tower Forest Association was not like the 3 major sorcerer factions, which had strict internal discipline and strong restrictions. It was just a loose and non-unified sorcerer alliance. If they really wanted to nominate one of them to die, it was likely that the association would fall apart at any moment, and a large number of people would leave. This was the reason why Gargamel and Winley came here to bargain with the association. They wanted their horses to run, but they didn't want them to eat grass. Where else could they find such a good deal? Following Grimm's orders and instructions, Gargamel showed off his ability to pester endlessly. He opened his mouth wide and made unreasonable demands one after another in front of Vice President Merva. He wanted resources, territory, people, treasures, knowledge. Almost everything Gargamel could think of. He made a long list, filled in a large number at the end, and then argued with the other party. Grade 4 sorcerer? What's that? Does it have anything to do with my demands? It had to be said that the loyal Gargamel was indeed worthy of being called the Scarlet Butler. For a mere little resources, he dared to jump up and down in front of a furious Grade 4 sorcerer, baring his fangs and brandishing his claws. Wizard Lauren, who was stuck in the middle, felt a headache coming on. After appeasing one, he went to appease the other. With great difficulty, he managed to suppress the two flames of anger, but when a new topic was brought up, the two flames of anger exploded again. A Grade 2 sorcerer and a Grade 4 sorcerer arguing with each other, and a Grade 3 sorcerer trying to mediate. Winley, who was standing at the side, felt her face twitching. She was having a hard time holding back her laughter. Most of the time, she would vaguely feel that the scene in front of her was so absurd and ridiculous. But on second thought, she felt that it was reasonable. After understanding the inside story, Winley was very clear that although Vice President Merva seemed to be jumping up and down in anger, he was actually very happy inside. After all, it was better for the association to lose some resources than for a dangerous quota. Therefore, no matter how fierce Gargamel was, he was only angry. Moreover, with Merva's strength as a Grade 4 sorcerer, if he was really angry, how could a Grade 3 sorcerer persuade him? He could probably just cast a spell and the world would be quiet. How could he tolerate an ant-like Grade 2 sorcerer being so arrogant and despotic in front of him? His anger was more than just a declaration of his position. It was just a warning to Gargamel that although the association was in the wrong, he should not go too far on his side. However, what was going too far, and what was not, was still a boundary that needed to be tested by a ruffian like Gargamel. In a situation where both sides were unwilling to shed all pretense of cordiality, the so-called bargaining was actually more like a farce. After a long and horse-heated discussion, both sides finally reached a basic agreement on a series of resources, items, and knowledge lists. When the thirsty Gargamel and Winley, accompanied by Laurian, personally went to the association's treasury to transport the supplies, Vice President Merva, who was left alone in the room, had his anger gradually subsiding. They really opened their mouths this time. They're a little too greedy. Merva said coldly. No one knew who he was talking to. It's good that they're greedy. If they weren't greedy, I'm afraid that the association would be in big trouble this time. President Fred's projection silently appeared behind Merva. It's not just a small loss this time. They even lost resources and materials. Their appetite is really big. Merva was still a little resentful. Can those resources and materials even compare to the value of a Grade 4 sorcerer? President Fred asked with a smile. Merva was silent. Finally, that little bit of unhappiness from before quickly disappeared. Merva secretly gritted his teeth in his heart. I'll just treat those things as money to buy Grimm's life. Large amounts of resources, materials, treasures, and knowledge poured into the Crimson family, making their foundation even more solid. Most of the Crimson Magi had no way of knowing the crisis that the higher-ups of the family were facing. They only knew that they were immersed in the joy of the family's great harvest. The master of the family was about to reach Grade 4. If the members of the family were left too far behind, how could they keep up with the master's footsteps? Hence, even without the encouragement of the higher-ups, there was already a frenzy among the Crimson Magi who went all out and worked hard to advance to the next rank. In a situation where the family's resources were abundant, the Magi with outstanding potential and talent also received a lot of resources. Therefore, there were countless people who improved one after another. However, most of these people who improved only advanced by a small rank. The number of people who actually advanced from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 was still extremely rare. Chapter 1055. Bliss walked alone in the tunnel of the Wizard's Pagoda. As his family had just won a great victory, the entire Wizard's Pagoda was filled with a relaxed and cheerful atmosphere. Bliss walked slowly along the wide and bright stone tunnel, using his hood to block the light from the illumination stones on the walls on both sides. He was like a soundless ghost as he roamed the interior of the Wizard's Pagoda. Just as he turned a corner, he bumped into 5 sorcerer apprentices who were holding heavy books in their hands. They were chattering away as they walked. Seeing Bliss's signature black wizard robe and the way he moved forward like water ripples, the 5 wizard apprentices hurriedly moved to the sides, leaning against the wall and bowing in unison. "Greetings, Sir Bliss." Bliss seemed oblivious. Under the shadow of his hood, countless pairs of scarlet eyes scanned the area, passing straight through the group of wizard apprentices. The thick black wizard robe swayed intensely at the bottom, letting out a series of strange cracking sounds. At the edge of the robe, countless black limbs could be seen moving quickly and rhythmically. From time to time, a few small black things would fall out of the robe, turning into black beetles the size of a fist. They would hiss and quickly chase after Bliss, burrowing into the black robe and disappearing without a trace. Looking at Bliss's constantly writhing and twisting black robe, the few wizard apprentices did not dare imagine how many similar bugs were hidden within. Could it be that the most terrifying worm wizard in the family, Sir Bliss, spent all day with thousands of bugs? After Bliss's terrifying black robe disappeared around the corner, the few wizard apprentices heaved a sigh of relief and resumed chatting and laughing. Silently returning to his residence on the 7th level of the Wizard's Pagoda, Bliss strolled into a cold, dark room. As a level 2 wizard in the family, Bliss could have easily obtained a better and more comfortable private residence. However, due to the nature of a worm wizard, he was increasingly disgusted with light and hated life. That was why he had purposely chosen this gloomy and cold place. There was not much furniture or decorations in the large room. Instead, there was a small wizard altar at the corner of the hall. The originally snow-white stone foundation was now dark red, and there were thick layers of purplish-black blood scabs on it. From the thickness and color of the scabs, it was obvious that they were not the remnants of the same period. As soon as they entered the hall, they could smell a pungent and suffocating stench of blood. Ordinary people would not be able to breathe in such an environment at all. However, the insect witch's unique sense of smell was so fragrant and fresh. There was also a huge glass mirror against the wall of the hall. Once Bliss returned to his residence, he went straight to the mirror without hesitation. The drooping hood was slightly raised, revealing a sea of scarlet pupils. After sweeping a glance at the black robe in the mirror, Bliss hesitated for a moment before he finally pulled open the robe. The black robe parted in the middle, revealing a terrifying body that one could not look at directly. It was a black and glossy beetle body that flickered with a cold luster. It had rows of short and sharp limbs, with the waist as the boundary. The area above the waist looked like an upright black beetle, while the area below the waist was curved like a huge abdominal sac filled with a yellowish-green turbid liquid. Through the translucent cavity, one could clearly see larval embryos floating in the yellowish-green liquid. From top to bottom, from inside to outside, there was no longer any trace of a human on the worm Lich Bliss body. His thoughts, preferences, habits, and behavior were completely different from most humans and Magi. This was undoubtedly the main reason why he covered his body all day and did not have much contact with normal humans. Even he himself could not tell if he was a human or a worm, much less an outsider. Many bloodline magi in the Magus community would more or less show signs of their bloodline manifesting, turning themselves into monsters that were neither human nor ghost. However, there were only a few like Bliss who changed so completely and simply. Within the family, there were also Blood Queen Mary, Demonic Lady Amelia, Fire Dragon Witch Winley, and Poison Magus Gargamel, who also walked the path of bloodline magi. After all, their bloodline manifesting only took up a portion of their bodies, and most of their bodies still retained their more obvious human characteristics. This made it easier for them to be accepted by their companions and integrate into the family circle. However, for someone like Bliss, who had completely mutated into a monster, not only was it difficult for the people around him to accept him, even he himself was getting more and more lost. Many times, Bliss would be at a loss when he woke up in the middle of the night. He could not tell where he was. Who was he? What kind of monster was he? Such distress and predicament had tormented him for a very long time, until the human bliss in his mind completely disappeared. Without the last shred of humanity, Bliss could finally become a true worm lich without fear. But soon after, it discovered the most terrifying problem. Without the help of the human bliss, he had almost lost the ability to level up and level up. No matter how much he killed, he only absorbed a bit of life essence to create more and more ferocious worm swarms. However, his main body's level did not change at all, and he could no longer improve his life essence. Worm Queen. The Worm Queen that Bliss had fused with only had a potential of level 3. It had only reached its current level after going through the fusion of the two Worm Lords, Intich and Bliss. However, the separation between the Worm Queen and the first Worm Lord had damaged part of its soul, causing it to be stuck at level 2 for a long time without being able to advance. The Crimson family had gone through so many trials and tribulations, and Bliss had also chosen the path of slaughter and evolution after fusing with the Worm Queen. During the war, he had even become a famed worm lich on the battlefield. Unfortunately, the scenery was strange, and it did not improve his strength at all. Thus, Bliss had lost interest in bloody massacres these days, and began to wander all over the place, looking for ways to solve his current predicament. Bloodline modification? Bliss had always been at the front lines of the battlefield, and had almost never calmed down to do any decent research. Hence, even if he made a last-minute effort now, it would be impossible for him to advance on the path of bloodline modification. Bloodline replacement? While there were some valuable bloodline regeneration potions in the family, Bliss chose to give up on them after a thorough comparison. Giant Serpent Bloodline, Pseudo-Dragon Bloodline. These all sounded wonderful, but they were not suitable for Bliss. Once Bliss chose bloodline substitution, it meant that all his previous efforts were in vain. He would have to start adapting to a completely different bloodline power from scratch. Moreover, the Worm Queen that he had fused with was the true owner of this body. Why would he do something that was akin to suicide? Hence, after much thought, Bliss could not find a way out. He had no choice but to silently communicate with the Tower Genie, requesting an audience with the family head. Blazing Flame Monarch, top floor secret room. After 3 months of secluded cultivation, Grimm had finally completed the difficult bloodline modification. AI, Chip, perform a deep scan on me. Beep. Mission accepted. Beginning deep scan. With a gentle electronic voice, the AI Chip used its powerful scanning and analysis abilities to quickly analyze Grimm's true strength. Grimm, male, rank 3 elemental magus, fire specialization. Chaotic physique, odd magic resistance. Stats, strength 24 plus 5, vitality, 27 plus 2, agility, 16 spirit, 39 bloodline ability, energy black hole. It had to be said that powerful chaotic creatures like the astral beasts were treasures from head to toe, and their bloodline abilities were even more powerful. After replacing his human bloodline with that of an astral beast, Grimm gained a chaotic physique that allowed him to absorb magic energy from the endless sea of stars. This meant that from now on, the endless sea of stars was no longer a dangerous place for him, but his home ground. As long as he did not get caught up in the most violent energy storms, Grimm would gain the ability to move freely in the sea of stars. As for the innate ability, energy black hole, it had something to do with the astral beasts. In times of danger, Grimm could use the ability to convert all magic energy within 10 meters of him into chaotic energy and absorb it for his own use. This state could be maintained for 5 seconds. According to Grimm's knowledge, all spellcasters hated chaotic energy. Hence, chaotic energy was violent and disorderly, and could not be used for shaping spells. Hence, this ability could be used to block a fatal spell attack. When the opponent's attack was about to hit him, Grimm only needed to use his energy black hole ability to turn the orderly magic energy in the opponent's spell into chaotic energy. This way, the opponent's attack would naturally collapse. Moreover, the chaotic physique gave Grimm a resistance that far exceeded that of normal magi. Grimm let the chip do some calculations. Although he was only at the peak of rank 3, his magic resistance was no weaker than that of a rank 4 elemental magus. In fact, if the battlefield was in the depths of the sea of stars where the energy storms wreaked havoc, Grimm would have a slight advantage due to his chaotic physique. After all, a wizard born in a plane could not directly absorb the violent magical energy in the void like Grimm could. This meant that Grimm could actively or passively absorb any magic elemental energy in an area with chaotic magic. Chapter 1056. Grimm only received the insect Lich Bliss request for an audience a month later. During this period of time, he had been busy with his bloodline replacement and had completely cut off all contact with the outside world. Taking advantage of the success of his bloodline reconstruction, he came out to rest his body and soul. Only then did he see the list of people that the Tower Genie had sent him. Even the slightest change in a bloodline was not a small matter to the main body, let alone this kind of world-changing bloodline replacement. The balance between his bloodline, body, and soul had been broken, and Grimm's strength had fallen to rock bottom. Right now, he urgently needed to build a new power system in his body with his new bloodline as its core. This was obviously a long and difficult process. Therefore, Grimm left the secret chamber and began to recuperate his body with all his might. For this secluded cultivation, Grimm had already planned out a few necessary steps in his mind. The first step was to adjust the foundation of his bloodline, using the Star Beast bloodline to replace his human bloodline. This would also allow him to gain a strange bloodline talent. The second step was to use the new bloodline talent to build a few necessary energy organs in his body to replace the outdated ones. His first choice was the heart of the flame demon. Right now, the heart of the flame demon was not of any use to Grimm, and it was often his weakness in battle. As such, he could not delay changing it into a true heart of the flame demon. The third step was naturally the most important part of this closed-door training. That was to use the origin substance to comprehend the laws of power and advance to the fourth stage. Out of the 3 steps that Grimm had formulated, the first 2 steps were to solidify his foundation. Only by straightening out the bloodline and witchcraft systems before advancing would it not affect his advancement after the 4th stage. Now, Grimm had successfully replaced his bloodline with the Star Beast bloodline. He now had the chaotic body and a good bloodline talent. This meant that he had successfully passed the first step. However, before starting the second step, he still needed to let the new bloodline, body, and soul in his body go through a certain degree of integration to build a new power system. As such, while he had nothing to do between the 2 steps, he took the opportunity to understand the situation within the family. Most of the reports that the Tower Genie had given him were the work reports of the core members of the family. Grimm did not need to personally intervene in these matters. He only needed to understand the situation of the family's internal affairs, and that would be enough. There weren't many things that required Grimm's approval, but there were still some that required his approval. For example, in the White Tower of the North, Winley had sent a top-secret message and was eagerly awaiting Grimm's reply. The Society of Magic, the underground organization created by the Goblin Princess Vanessa, was showing signs of breaking away from the Crimson family control. According to the reports of the spies hidden in the Mystic Association, after more than 40 years of development and strengthening, the Mystic Association had developed into a large force with over 100 core members and close to 1,000 subordinates. Recently, the Lesser Wing Mystic Association had begun to grow restless, brewing a shocking escape plan. The main idea of this escape plan was to free the Goblin Plane from the Crimson family's rule, allowing the goblins to become the sole rulers of the plane. Their initial plan was to collect and organize the sorcerer world's knowledge and alchemy achievements, then smuggle them into the Goblin Plane bit by bit. When the higher-ups of the Mystic Association felt that they had collected enough, they would mobilize the core members to carry out a suicidal attack, at the same time destroying the teleportation formation between the Goblin Plane and the Crimson family. When the connection between the two was severed, they would naturally regain their freedom. By then, the Goblin Empire, which had regained its independence, would sit on the foundation of the sorcerer world's hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated alchemy knowledge. They would open up a new path in the Goblin Plane that was suitable for the goblins' magical technology development. That way, the goblins might become a new and powerful tribe in the multiverse and rise to the top of the world. It had to be said that when Grimm first saw Winley's summary of the situation of the Mystic Association, he almost burst out laughing. However, when he thought about it seriously, he was inexplicably amazed by the strange ideas of these little fellows. That Vanessa really did not give up on her identity as the Goblin Princess. At every moment, every second, she was planning for the goblin race's independence and rise. Although their plan sounded feasible, in reality, it was ridiculous and ridiculous. Not to mention Grimm, the legendary family head. Even a core sorcerer from the Crimson family could easily crush the escape plan that they had been planning for almost 50 years. Just the core of the plan, blowing up the teleportation formation, was extremely laughable. Blowing up the teleportation formation connecting the two places would cut off the Crimson family's connection with the Goblin Plane? This question was so childish that it was laughable. To prevent such a situation from happening, the higher-ups of the Crimson family had already buried special positioning stones in 5 secret places in the Goblin Plane. Even if the Mystic Association's plan succeeded, the Crimson sorcerers would still be able to calculate the coordinates of the Goblin Plane through those positioning stones. At that time, opening a teleportation gate and leading an elite sorcerer army into the Goblin Plane was just a matter of time. Moreover, the goblins' vision and structure were still too low. They could not see how intense and bloody the development and evolution of the entire multiverse was. Goblins, how dare such a lowly race dream of standing at the top of the world? If that Goblin Princess Vanessa knew what happened to the Morian Plane, she would probably not dare to have such wishful thinking anymore. The Morian Plane was a powerful and huge arcane empire, an arcane system that was almost comparable to the power of witchcraft. When they were unwilling to be left out and wanted to rise to the top of the world, they were besieged by several major forces and camps. In this cruel and bloody world, to grow into a top predator, one must have sharp fangs and claws that could stop the enemy. Otherwise, not only would your mature cry not bring you any dignity, but it would also attract hordes of carnivorous creatures. In your eyes, you might already be strong enough, having conquered one weakling after another. But in the eyes of the top predators, your flesh that was gradually becoming plump and strong was a delicacy that they would salivate over. If he did not have the power to protect himself, then instead of exposing himself to the top predators, he might as well hide in the stinky, black mud like before and continue to live the life that he enjoyed in isolation, instead of exposing himself to the eyes of the top predators. At least, the multiverse was so big, and the endless sea of stars was so vast. No matter how sharp the predator's eyes and ears were, it was not easy to find every plane world to invade and enslave. So, there was actually a paradox in the development of plane worlds. If a plane world chose to isolate itself, it would not be easily discovered by the predators, but it would also be difficult to improve its own strength. After all, there was a limit to the internal resources of a sealed plane world. Although it could be continuously cycled, the total amount of the plane's origin was there, and the total amount of matter and life it could produce was also fixed. Why was the sorcerer's world so powerful? Because the sorcerers had stepped out of the plane, invaded and enslaved many secondary planes, and brought their resources and life back to the sorcerer's world. In this way, the plane's origin of the sorcerer's world continuously expanded and strengthened, thus being able to produce more matter and life, and making the matter and life individuals inside even more powerful. Why did the sorcerers look down on the natives of the secondary planes? Apart from psychological reasons, in terms of physiological structure and soul essence, the creatures of the sorcerer's world were superior to the natives of the secondary planes. The plane's origin nurtured all things and creatures in the world, and the powerful creatures used various means to bring back spoils of war to the plane, which could indirectly nourish the plane's origin. This was one of the basic rules of the development of planes. As long as there was no powerful force to break this cycle, any plane could obtain a kind of intrinsic improvement through the accumulation of a long period of time. However, if the plane wanted to develop, the creatures inside had to step out of the plane to fight wars, to invade, to enslave, or to trade. They had to use various methods to fight for the opportunity for their own plane's origin to develop and strengthen. However, stepping out of the plane and igniting the flames of civilization also meant exposing themselves from the darkness. When that time came, would they devour other planes to develop and strengthen, or would they attract stronger predators, making themselves prey instead? That was something that was hard to say. Hence, the rise of a plane civilization not only required powerful abilities, but also great luck. Most of the time, the latter was far more important than the former. Right now, Grimm was already at the peak of Grade 3 and was on the threshold of the plane's limit. Hence, the world that he could come into contact with and understand was more realistic and also more cruel. That goblin princess Vanessa was just a high-grade Grade 1 machine sorcerer at the end of the day. What she could see of the sorcerer's world was only the surface, and she could not come into contact with the deeper things that determined the status of the sorcerer's faction. Hence, the more he understood about Vanessa's escape plan, the sadder Grimm felt for her. He had to admit that Vanessa was also someone with great ideals and ambitions, but it was a pity she did not have the power to match her ideals and ambitions. Hence, the greater her ideals, the more damage she would bring to the goblins. To put it bluntly, she would drag the entire goblin race with her ideals, and even the entire goblin plane to perish and sink with her. Chapter 1057. After coming out of the secret chamber, the first person Grimm met was the goblin god of war, Tygol. When Tygol read the detailed and comprehensive information, he could not help but break out in sweat. His body, that was less than 1.5 meters, began to tremble uncontrollably. At the end of the day, he was just a little Grade 1 goblin. Only when he was in a combat magical machine could he unleash the so-called Grade 2 battle strength. Hence, when Tygol stood in front of Grimm and endured his cold and merciless gaze, a shiver that came from the depths of his soul took over his entire body. The past few decades were enough for Tygol and Vanessa to drift apart, and they went on 2 different paths of development. At least, Tygol's name rarely appeared in the reports of the Magic Association that Vanessa submitted. This was also one of the main reasons why Grimm called Tigul over. After reading the entire report, Tygol seemed to have aged a few decades. His goblin appearance and spirit seemed to have collapsed. My lord, Vanessa's actions do not represent the entire goblin race. Standing in front of Grimm, Tygol, who was eager to express his stance, was already incoherent. He did not even know what he was saying. Such a huge move, such a huge plan, she cannot carry it out alone. She must rope in some goblins with sufficient strength and weight. How do you think I should deal with them? Grim, who was draped in a red robe, stared coldly at Tygol with a pale face. My lord, don't doubt the loyalty of the goblins. All these years, your benevolence and generosity have won the respect and trust of the goblins. I dare say that apart from a few stubborn old goblins, most of the goblins are on your side. Stubborn old goblins? Does that mean you have some understanding of these people? Yes. It was a simple yes, but it left Tygol hesitant and heartbroken. When I received this report, the Magic Association had already become active. They are actively pushing forward the escape plan. Tell me, how should I deal with them? Although Grim's words were light and breezy, Tygol's heart trembled with fear. After all these years of edification and experience, how could Tigul not understand the Magi's hatred and cruelty towards traitors? Hence, no matter how much he wanted to protect Vanessa, he had to consider if he would drag the entire goblin race into the abyss of destruction. On top of that, although Tigul didn't agree with Vanessa's decision, he didn't actively step forward to stop her. One unspeakable reason was that subconsciously, Tigul might have hoped that Vanessa's operation would succeed. In the decades that the Mana Association had been developing and growing, she had come into contact with and bewitched many of the goblin leaders. However, they either chose to follow her lead or ignored her. After all, there were only a few who could actively provide information to the Crimson family's higher-ups. And in the depths of their hearts, these fellows likely had the same thoughts as Tigul. He didn't want to get himself involved, yet he was happy to see it happen. This kind of thinking was also poisonous. If they got to the bottom of this, the Crimson family might not be able to avoid a large-scale purge of the entire goblin race. Once the family raised the butcher's knife against the goblins, the branches of the family that weren't on good terms with the goblins might jump out and add fuel to the fire, making the situation worse. If this happened, it was highly possible that the entire goblin race would be unable to rise again, and they would be reduced to a second-rate faction within the family. This was clearly something that Tigul couldn't accept. Hence, faced with the family head's almost coercive questioning, Tigul could only speak with difficulty and promise. Sir, don't worry. Leave this matter to me. I will definitely handle it to your satisfaction. Now that things had come to this, no matter how little hope there was, Tigul still wanted to fight for the right to take charge of this matter. Only by taking control of the situation and accurately eliminating the bad goblins could he prevent the side branches from causing unnecessary trouble and escalating the situation, which would then turn into a suppression of the entire goblin race. Grim examined Tigul and finally said, "You've been with me for decades, so I have this bit of trust in you. I'll leave this matter to you. After you leave, remember to gather Cabby, Loke, and Dusula. Use the shortest amount of time and speed to handle this matter for me." "Understood, sir. I'll definitely take care of it." After subserviently agreeing, Tygol respectfully retreated from the room. After Tigul left, the light in the reception room changed. A green plant placed in the corner actually warped and transformed into the appearance of the great goblin sage Cabby. "You heard everything Tigul said just now, right? After we leave this place, he'll be in charge of handling the matters of the Magic Association. However, I want you to help me keep an eye on his every move and make sure he doesn't overstep the rules. If he has any improper thoughts..." Grim took out a puppet talisman that could summon elemental equipment and threw it to Cabby. "You have to stop him. If you handle this matter well, I'll help you deal with the conflict in your bloodline." Cabby's innate potential was inferior to that of a human's. Even after absorbing the giant serpent bloodline regeneration potion, the bloodline power he absorbed was far inferior to Gargamel's. Cabby couldn't even form a snake head, and even the dark green scales on his body were sparse, unable to form a true serpent scale armor. Grabbing the puppet talisman, Cabby's dark green face was filled with excitement and fanaticism. He immediately patted his chest loudly. "Master, don't worry. With me here, those blind fellows can forget about playing any tricks." Go. It had been a long time since he'd been in contact with Grim, and this had left Cabby's heart feeling empty, unable to calm down. But now, As Grim tossed him a bone, Cabby's vigor and spirit immediately rose. He was so excited that even his beady eyes became bright and spirited. After Cabby left excitedly, Grim hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still chose to meet Bliss. Thus, 7 minutes after sending the message, the insect Lich Bliss hurried over and met the reclusive family head at the top of the blazing flame monarch. "You want to see me? Tell me, what's the matter?" Grim yawned lightly, looking listless. The previous bloodline replacement had consumed too much of his energy and mind. Furthermore, as the new bloodline was fusing with his body and soul, it was also continuously consuming his energy. Therefore, at this moment, what he needed the most was rest and nourishment. To be honest, if it wasn't for the fact that the insect Lich Bliss had followed him for a long time and was considered one of the most capable warriors of the Crimson family in the early stages, Grim would not even meet a grade 2 small fry with his current status. "Sir, I can no longer move forward on the path of evolution." The worm wizard who had waited for months to see Grim knew that time was precious, so he no longer pretended to hide his problem and directly stated his problem. "Sir, I can no longer move forward on the path of evolution." "Oh?" Grim was slightly taken aback upon hearing this. Only then did he sit up straight, blue light flickering in his black pupils as he began to size up the insect shaman Bliss before him. Although the bloodline fusion in his body had taken up a lot of his spiritual force, and although Bliss's body was surrounded by a defensive force field that could not be seen by the naked eye, Bliss's instinctive defensive force field could not block the AI chip's scan and depth perception in the face of the great disparity in spiritual force. While Bliss was trembling under Grim's eyes that seemed to contain powerful magic, Grim had quickly gathered all the necessary data. Bliss, high grade 2. Occupation, bloodline magus, insect shaman. Stats, strength 7, vitality 12, agility 7, spirit 27. It had to be said that Bliss was a summoning-type insect shaman. Since he did not have to personally enter the battlefield, he rarely refined or modified his body. Hence, among the rank 2 magi, his basic stats could be said to be pitiful. However, this was not a big problem. As long as he was given enough time and resources, it would not be a problem for him to build up a body with decent stats. On the contrary, the thing that was restricting Bliss's evolution was not his insect body, but his insect mother. In essence, the insect mother that Intich had obtained through some unknown method had a limit of rank 3. After separating from Intich, it had chosen to fuse with Bliss again. This change in host had undoubtedly depleted much of its potential. Hence, when Bliss advanced step by step to high grade 2, he could clearly feel his evolution slowing down to the point that it seemed to be stuck. The reason why Bliss was in such a hurry to meet Grim was naturally because he wanted his help in finding a new direction to continue his evolution. The same problem probably existed in all blood sorcerers to some extent. Once his evolution potential was exhausted, it meant that he had reached the end of his path as a magus. Even if he spent hundreds of years, he would not be able to improve his strength. That kind of despair that was carved deep into his bones was the most torturous. With Bliss's talent and strength, he would have needed 300 to 400 years to grow and reach the limit of his potential in the latter half of his insect life. However, following in Grim's footsteps, Bliss had become a capable fighter of the Crimson family. In just 100 years, he had reached the limit of his evolution. This was his misfortune, but at the same time, it was a great fortune. Chapter 1058. It was the problem of the bloodline shackles again. Grim supported his chin with his hand, sizing up Bliss as he sighed. As a bloodline sorcerer, in the first half of a sorcerer's life, be it in the battles between sorcerers or the acquisition of sorcery knowledge, they had a lot of advantages. Among sorcerers of the same rank, bloodline sorcerers had the advantages of anatomy refinery sorcerers and elemental sorcerers, but they did not have their shortcomings. However, once they reached the bloodline shackles, it would be an almost unsolvable problem. The essence of bloodline sorcerers was to continuously purify their bloodlines and reproduce the terrifying combat power of some powerful creatures from ancient times. However, there are thousands of bloodline sources that they chose, and not all of them could be improved infinitely. Most bloodline sorcerers could only try their best to approach the terrifying power of ancient monsters, but they were limited by the contamination and mixing of their bloodlines, and it was difficult to reach the same level as them. If a bloodline sorcerer's source of origin was a rank 6 creature in ancient times, then after countless years of changes, sorcerers of today could reproduce most of its power. Reaching rank 4 or 5 was already considered a pure bloodline. There were only 2 ways to completely reproduce the power of an ancient monster and reach rank 6 at its peak. One was to traverse thousands of mountains and rivers, searching for the pure-blooded descendants of that monster in every plain or sea of stars. The other was to hide in a sorcery lab for years, thinking of ways to purify their own bloodlines day after day. Apart from this, there was no other way to continue improving. Changing bloodlines halfway? Sure, there was always a higher mountain to look for. If you wanted to use a high-grade bloodline to replace an original low-grade bloodline, then the backlash and mixing of the 2 bloodlines would be a big problem that you had to solve as soon as possible. According to the records of the sorcerer world, changing bloodlines once did not have a huge impact on the sorcerer's origin. However, from the second time onwards, the difficulty of changing bloodlines would increase exponentially to the point where the origin of the soul would be damaged. Moreover, until now, sorcerers had not found a way to perfect bloodline replacement. Every time a bloodline was replaced, the remnants of the old bloodline would cause serious contamination to the new bloodline, which would affect the depth of fusion between the new bloodline and the host's body and soul. The more the bloodline was replaced, the more contamination was left behind. Once the accumulation of unstable factors exceeded the limits of the physical body, the final outcome would be the collapse of the body. Due to the difficulty of bloodline replacement, many wizards chose to adopt the bloodline modification method. They would no longer replace the entire bloodline. Instead, they would tinker and extract some powerful abilities from a certain bloodline and infuse into their original bloodline, thus forming a hybrid situation. This kind of bloodline modification did indeed reduce the difficulty by a lot, but it also caused more serious bloodline contamination. Those who were determined to continue to improve their strength would never use such a method, because it was more difficult to advance with a contaminated bloodline. Once the contamination exceeded a certain level, the lightest consequence would be the loss of the hope of advancing to the next rank. In the worst case, one would become neither human nor ghost, and it would be difficult for them to communicate with other wizards. Within the Crimson family, the number of bloodline magi increased day by day. They had yet to advance to the next rank, and there was still a long way to go before they could touch the bloodline shackles. This problem was not that urgent. However, high-ranked bloodline magi, such as Buglich Bliss and Blood Queen Mary, would more or less face similar problems. If the family couldn't come up with an effective solution, for the sake of their own future, these high-grade sorcerers might leave their families en masse to join the 3 major sorcerer organizations. After all, if a single Magus family could not solve a problem, the 3 major Magus organizations might be able to find a solution. Thus, when Bliss appeared in front of him, Grimm realized that the Crimson family lacked materials and knowledge in bloodline research. If this situation continued, when the Magi nurtured by the family advanced to the next rank, the bloodline shackles would restrict the family's strength even more. It was time to set up a bloodline research lab. Some projects related to bloodlines also needed to be researched immediately. The family's bloodline material storage also needed to be expanded. After comforting Bliss, Leyland collected large amounts of bug blood, bug carapace, and flesh from his body. In the end, when Grimm used the excuse of finding a way to solve the bloodline shackles problem, Bliss even gritted his teeth and offered up a drop of origin blood from the Bug Queen. If not for the fact that he could not solve the bloodline shackles problem himself, he would not have been able to obtain such materials and data even if he killed Bliss. After all, he was now a powerful mid-ranked Magus. exposing all his secrets and data to another magus. This could be said to be an extremely daring and risky move. If Grimm really had any ill intentions towards him, the flesh and blood that he had taken from him would be more than enough to control his life and death. After sending Bliss away, Grimm muttered to himself for a moment before giving the Chip a new mission. Chip, prepare to build a family bloodline database based on the information and data we have. Beep. Mission accepted. Database is being constructed and perfected. After a long and messy search, a preliminary bloodline database was projected in Grimm's mind. Beep. Bloodline database established. Currently, the database contains the following special bloodline branches: Dragon Bloodline, 7%, Vampire Bloodline, 52%, Astral Beast Bloodline, 3%, Mechanical Magus Bloodline, 23%, Insect Bloodline, 13%, Giant Serpent Bloodline, 48%, Elf Bloodline, 83%, Beast Race Bloodline, 26%, Holy Light Bloodline, 92%, Spore Bloodline, 17%. Grimm slowly scanned through the database and could not help but feel apprehensive. Every time he went to a region or a plane, he would think of ways to collect and sort out the magic knowledge, magical creatures, and resources of the natives. Unknowingly, he had come into contact with and investigated so many special bloodlines in the past 200 years. The Chip even marked the completeness of the information it had collected and organized behind each unique bloodline. Once the information on a bloodline reached 100%, it meant that the bloodline was no longer a secret to Grimm. As long as he had enough bloodline materials and test subjects, Grimm could easily modify the bloodline. In extreme cases, Grimm could even create some pseudo-bloodlines. Although it was a fake bloodline, with the AI chip's meticulous and terrifying control, the person with the fake bloodline would not be any weaker than a real bloodline. However, the spells used might be too intense or berserk, causing the person with a bloodline to have a small loss in potential or lifespan. However, for most low-ranked magi, as long as they could obtain more powerful innate abilities and battle prowess, a small loss in vitality was nothing. Grimm looked at the list of bloodlines and could not help but mutter to himself. Of all the special bloodlines, only the Holy Light bloodline and the Elven bloodline had the most complete information. According to Grimm's estimations, this was related to the Holy Light bloodline and the Elven bloodline that he had killed and collected. For example, the Holy Light bloodline had killed more than a dozen grade 3 Golden Knights in one go, and he had even plundered a Holy Light cemetery that had the skeleton of a grade 4 Holy Knight. This meant that he had already collected all the basic information on Holy Knights from grade 1 to grade 4. If he had the chance, he could study the skeleton of the grade 4 Holy Knight in his storage ring and complete the information on the Holy Light bloodline to 100% without a problem. As for the Elven bloodline, it was purely related to his crazy massacre in the Lance Plain. In order to help Alice obtain the Prophecy Scepter, Grimm and his party had killed tens of thousands of elves, and they had killed almost all the combat and life professions of the elven race. If not for the lack of information on grade 4 elves, the information on the Elven bloodline would have been shockingly complete. Apart from that, the Giant Serpent and Vampire bloodlines in the database were also close to 50% complete. Grimm had already killed 2 Giant Serpent sorcerers and obtained the rare Giant Serpent bloodline regeneration potion and pure blood potion. It was all thanks to their help that the Giant Serpent bloodline's completion rate was so high. As for the Vampire bloodline, it was all thanks to Mary. With Mary's company, Yangling had researched quite a number of grade 1 to grade 3 vampire sorcerers, but he had only managed to complete half of the vampire bloodline. Now that Mary had become a pure blood vampire, it should not be difficult for her to reach grade 4. However, Sherphone was at a loss as to how he should proceed after tier 4. If Grimm did not help her, with Mary's talent as a sorcerer and vampire, it would be almost impossible for her to find her own path. Moreover, Grimm had become a bloodline sorcerer, and he had the rare Astral Beast bloodline. The advantage of this bloodline was its strange chaotic constitution, which allowed him to absorb a portion of the chaotic energy. Moreover, according to the records of the sorcerer world, astral beasts were powerful creatures of chaos up to grade 8. Even if Grimm's astral beast bloodline was slightly inferior, it would not be a problem for him to avoid bloodline shackles before he reached grade 7. Hence, Grimm now had both the bloodline sorcerer and elemental sorcerer paths. A bloodline sorcerer would grant him a strong physique and powerful bloodline abilities, while an elemental sorcerer would grant him unparalleled elemental might. Either one of these two paths was worth a lifetime of polishing and nurturing by magi. Now, Grimm wanted to have both, which meant that he would need to spend at least twice as much precious resources and knowledge as other sorcerers of the same grade. Chapter 1059. Bloodline sorcerers and elemental sorcerers had very different methods of leveling up. Elemental sorcerers never considered tempering their bodies. Instead, they focused on elemental sorcery knowledge collection and model construction. They paid more attention to the affinity and harmonization between magical elements and spiritual force. Elemental sorcerers only cared about having enough physical strength. They would also think of ways to improve and adjust their bodies to a certain extent. It was enough for them to resist the invasion of various harsh environments in the plane. Most of the remaining resources were allocated to the improvement and nourishment of spiritual force. Of course, the necessary spell equipment, spell tools, and spell models were also essential. Moreover, if they wanted to convert the collected magic knowledge into their own abilities, they would need to analyze, familiarize, and improve the spell models, nurture and improve their spiritual force, and create magic equipment. All of these required a lot of resources and time. Therefore, there was never enough time for sorcerers. As for bloodline sorcerers, they focused more on the integration of their body, soul, and bloodline. They would think of ways to improve their physique. This would also amplify the increase in physique brought by the power of their bloodline. They would use special magic to continuously purify their bloodline and reproduce more of the power of their bloodline. This was the most common way of training for bloodline sorcerers. More bloodline sorcerers liked to devour the same kind of bloodline, using the other party's bloodline power as nourishment to boost their own bloodline power. Although this method was somewhat taboo, it could not be completely banned. Therefore, bloodline sorcerer families strictly monitored every individual in their clan. There were also special magic methods that could detect if a member of the clan had devoured the bloodline of the same clan. Once a violation was discovered, the punishment would be death or the bloodline talent would be taken away. One of the 2 bottles of giant serpent bloodline regeneration potions that Grimm had obtained was the origin blood of a giant serpent sorcerer. Naturally, they came from losers who were punished by their families. Now that Grimm was both a bloodline sorcerer and an elemental sorcerer, this meant that he needed to temper his body and learn new magic knowledge and spell models. The time and resources he needed to do this was naturally double that of a sorcerer of the same rank. If he didn't have a huge force that he could rely on to help him complete the collection of resources and knowledge, he might not be able to complete these basic tasks even at the end of his life. Grimm now had the Star Beast bloodline, which allowed him to directly devour chaos magic energy. According to the AI chip's feedback, in order to nourish the Astral Beast bloodline, Grimm would need to devour some nourishing food. 4-star beasts, the so-called Great Nourishment, was nothing more than chaotic energy, elemental heart, source substance, and other star beast flesh and blood. These items were either rare and hard to find or extremely precious. None of them were easy to obtain. With the help of the AI chip, there was no need for Grimm to spend extra time learning and familiarizing himself. The spell models were all analyzed by the AI chip and entered into Grimm's consciousness, saving him a great deal of time to analyze and practice. Grimm was able to advance 5 times faster than other elemental sorcerers, and he had to admit that it was directly related to the AI chip's help. Hearing the AI chip list so many precious resources in one go, Grim couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. AI chip, is there no easier way to improve the Star Beast bloodline? Out of the few things that the AI chip mentioned, Grim only had a small amount of source substance in reserve. These source substances were used to strengthen the soul and increase comprehension of laws, and could not be used to nourish the Star Beast bloodline. Hence, Grim could only hope that the AI chip would be able to find some cheap resources that were easy to find. Beep found a suitable substitute for improving the Star Beast bloodline. What is it? Grim asked in pleasant surprise. Chaos magic energy. Using the magic furnace to communicate with the void, absorbing unmodified chaos magic energy, and using a sufficient amount to replace chaos energy. How will the effects be? Grim couldn't help but ask in concern. Beep. Based on data calculations and deductions, host absorbs chaos magic energy for 4 hours a day. After a month, the quality of the Star Beast bloodline will increase by 1%, and the chaos physique will increase by 2 or 7%. Only 4 hours a day? Why is the duration so short? Can it be extended to increase the rate of improvement? Beep. Although host has the chaos physique, continuously absorbing chaos magic energy for 4 hours will cause the body to accumulate a certain amount of elemental damage. Hence, it has to be stopped for a period of time to allow the body to repair itself and absorb. 4 hours a day is the best time to absorb. So that's how it is. Grim muttered to himself for a moment and couldn't help but ask, if I absorb enough 100 moons and raise the quality of the Star Beast bloodline to 100%, what will happen? The quality of the Star Beast bloodline will rise by 1 rank, and host will obtain a new bloodline innate ability. Grim inhaled a breath of cold air. This was the first time he had experienced the might of bloodline magi. If every increase in quality of one's bloodline was accompanied by the appearance of a new bloodline ability, wouldn't bloodline magi obtain a few powerful attacks that did not require spiritual force? It was no wonder that bloodline magi rarely delved into elemental spells, but could always activate powerful spells that did not require any incantations or gestures. So they were not using spells, but bloodline abilities. 100 moons was only 10 years, and he could obtain a powerful bloodline ability from nothing. No matter how he looked at it, it was extremely worth it. When he had obtained the Star Beast bloodline, he had already obtained a bloodline ability called Energy Black Hole. The AI chip's evaluation of it was rather high. If he could obtain another bloodline ability in 10 years, it would definitely not be weaker than Energy Black Hole, no matter what it was. Thinking of this, Grim couldn't help but lick his dry lips, secretly looking forward to it. 10 years might be a long time for a regular human, but to Grim, it was just a small journey. At least this time, Grim planned to spend more than 20 years to complete his advancement plan. Northern Lands, White Tower. Vanessa, who was dressed like a young human girl, was carrying a thick stack of spell books as she walked through the magic corridor. Along the way, she smiled and nodded at many magi and acolytes she bumped into. As the White Tower's rather famous mechanical witch, Vanessa had also taken on the 2 special subjects of the source of mechanical spells and research on the substitution of magical energy. After 30 years of hard work, Vanessa had taught and nurtured a few qualified magi. Her personality was also extremely gentle, and her attitude was much more approachable than other magi. Hence, most of the magi acolytes looked up to her and respected her. Therefore, during her time in the White Tower, almost all the magi and acolytes ignored Vanessa's unique identity as a goblin princess and treated her as a human magus. Vanessa's face that was made of special magical alloy revealed a warm and peaceful smile, and she maintained this expression until she entered her residence. When the door to her residence slowly closed behind her, the sweet smile on Vanessa's face finally disappeared, and it turned back into that cold, expressionless metallic face. 2 goblin mechanical warlocks in the uniform of the Violent Blood Group were waiting for her in her residence. When they saw Vanessa returning, the two goblin mechanical warlocks surrounded her hurriedly and whispered into her ears. "What? You're saying that Grimm personally summoned Tygol?" "Yes, Your Highness. My men saw it with their own eyes. Although the blazing flame monarch has already been sealed, anyone who wants to enter or leave the monarch will have to pass through Songta City. That's why I've arranged for my men there." He saw with his own eyes that Lord Tygol passed through Songta City and went straight to the blazing flame monarch. He stayed there for half a day before leaving. Apart from Tygol, who else did Grimm summon? Before Tygol, Grimm even summoned Cabby, but he never left. After Lord Tygol, there's still the insect, Witch Bliss. What is that fellow trying to do? Isn't he busy absorbing the source substance now? Why does he have the time to summon Cabby, Tygol, and the others? If I remember correctly, they haven't met alone for more than 20 years. Yes, it's precisely because we can't figure out why he summoned Lord Tygol that my lord sent me to ask Your Highness if we should pause the plan and make a decision after we figure out his intentions. When the two goblin mechanical warlocks mentioned that plan, they couldn't help but lower their voices. They even craned their necks to look around in fear and panic. "No, the plan cannot be stopped. We must continue. I've already made arrangements at the White Tower. As long as we blow up the teleportation formation, the spies you've arranged in the city will have to act quickly. The magi they've arranged to guard the city won't be able to do much apart from the wind Magus Desura, who's a little troublesome. All you need to do is block them off and send people to destroy the teleportation formation. Our plan will be considered a success. But, Lord Ganga, Lord Loke, they're still in the Magus world. Once the teleportation formation is destroyed, they won't be able to return to the Goblin Plane. Those traitors, they've long since stopped treating themselves as goblins, so why bother thinking about them? Just let them stay in the Crimson family and suffer their wrath. In the 100 years that they've been enslaved by the Magi, the goblins had only produced these few powerful beings. Abandoning them in the Magus world for no reason made all the goblins feel extremely pained. However, the reality was just as the princess had said. They no longer treated themselves as goblins. If they were dragged into the plan, it was very likely that the grand plan they'd been planning for decades would be exposed. Chapter 1060. Just as the three of them were still plotting, a series of loud bangs rang out. The door to the residence was being slammed loudly. The three people in the room shuddered and looked at each other. Vanessa was the owner of this place and naturally had the highest authority here. She waved her hand casually, and a light screen appeared in front of her. The scene outside the residence was reflected on it. Looking at the tall and familiar figure on the light screen, Vanessa's crimson mechanical eyes glowed brightly. Then, she fell silent for some reason. The tall figure standing outside the door was none other than the gnome ripper that Tygol was riding. The other two gnome mechanical warlocks looked at each other, starting to feel that things were getting out of hand. They were heading in the direction of losing control. They had just been discussing Tygol, and he had already charged to the door. He was even in his standard battle form. Could this be a coincidence? Based on the time, the other party should have rushed here as soon as he left the Flame Monarch. Otherwise, the timing would not be so precise. Seeing her two contacts so anxious, Princess Vanessa scolded them sternly before waving her hand to get them to leave. In a secret room in the residence, there were a few gnome teleportation devices that led to different regions. They could avoid the Wizard's Pagoda's inspection and allow the gnomes to enter and leave while concealed. After the figures of the two gnome warlocks disappeared from the gnome teleportation device, Vanessa regained her composure. Then, she strolled to the door and removed the witchcraft protection around the residence. The door opened. Tygol rode on the Goblin Ripper and smashed open the alloy door of the residence. His heavy footsteps rumbled as he barged in. Behind him, there were a dozen fully armed battle magic machines. "Tygol, this is my private residence. You have no right to barge in." Vanessa's crimson mechanical eyes shone with a bright red glow. She opened her arms wide and stood in front of the tall metal magic machine, questioning him angrily. The gnome Ripper ignored Vanessa's question. It lifted its huge leg and stepped over her head, smashing open the doors of 4 to 5 secret rooms until it found the gnome teleportation devices. The operating principles of the gnome teleportation devices were completely different from the teleportation formations of the wizards. As such, they could bypass the other party's surveillance and detection. If Vanessa only wanted her own convenience, a gnome teleportation device would suffice. But now, there were 5 expensive goblin teleportation devices in front of her. It might work if she said that Vanessa was using them to save a few steps, but it would be too childish if she wanted to use it to deceive Tickhole. The moment the Goblin Ripper saw the 5 goblin teleportation instruments, it suddenly froze on the spot. Vanessa, who was following closely behind it, also fell silent. After a long time, the Goblin Ripper stood up and silently waved its hand. The dozen powerful battle magic machines that followed it into the house slowly retreated and closed the door. However, they did not leave. Instead, they assumed a fighting stance and stood guard. After a long while, the Goblin Ripper finally turned around slowly and faced the petite and adorable Princess Vanessa with its ferocious steel body. "Long time no see, Vanessa." Tickle's deep and tired voice came from the ferocious steel body. "Can you explain to me why these gnome teleportation devices are here?" Princess Vanessa's completely metallic body did not move. Even her exquisite and perfect mechanical face was expressionless. She obviously refused to answer Tickle's question. "What are you trying to do?" Tickle's voice was filled with anger and powerlessness, but there was an unconcealable anxiety in it. Faced with the question of her admirer, Vanessa finally spoke. "Help the gnomes rise again." Rely on what? Rely on the pity and charity of the wizards? The magic crystals you use belong to the wizards. The knowledge you learn belongs to the wizards. The space you live in belongs to the wizards. Everything you have belongs to the wizards. What do you have to fight against the wizards? With the lives of 300 million gnomes? The rage in Tickle's chest grew, and his tone became sharper. In the end, he even roared. "But everything that you said was originally ours. The wizards took everything from us, and then threw the leftovers back to us as a reward for our loyalty and diligence. This is not fair. I want to take back everything that belongs to us." Facing Tickhole, who was shouting himself hoarse, Vanessa finally roared. She clenched her fists and roared loudly. This was the first time she had spoken her heart out loud. "So that's what you think." Faced with Vanessa, who had finally opened her heart to him, Tickhole was not as irascible. "Then, do you know why I'm here today? It's that tyrant. It's that evil wizard who took everything from us who sent you here." "That's right. Perhaps what you said is right. But so what? You've lived in the Magus world for decades, and should have seen and experienced the power of the wizards. Do you think that if Lord Grimm did not invade and enslave the gnomes, we would be able to continue living on our own?" Vanessa, who had been roaring just a moment ago, suddenly shut her mouth and chose to remain silent. She was no longer the little gnome princess who was ignorant and narrow-minded. She was now a mechanical wizard who had seen and experienced the outside world. Through reading a large number of books written by the wizards and witnessing many examples with her own eyes, Vanessa now clearly understood how isolated and primitive the Goblin's plane was in the past. Even though she did not want to admit it, she could not avoid the problems that existed in the gnome plane due to the civilization she had received and instilled in her all these years. Compared to the Magus world and the thousands of secondary planes that were enslaved by the Magus world, the gnome plane was too weak and backward. The only thing that could be praised in the gnome plane was the shocking amount of metal resources. As for the gnomes, they were a bunch of weak races that guarded the treasure trove of resources, but did not have the ability to own them. Even if they encountered any other plane of a larger scale, the gnomes would not be able to escape the fate of being enslaved and slaughtered, much less the Magus world. Furthermore, metal resources were rare, but the gnomes did not qualify as resources. They did not even have the right to be enslaved. Hence, Meeting the Crimson family and Grimm in the Gnome Plain was considered to be rather fortunate. At least the Crimson family did not use the most barbaric and cruel method to rule the Gnome Plain. They did not enslave the gnomes and make them minors. This was already a blessing in disguise. However, just like Vanessa's identity as a princess, she could not get rid of the heavy and damned label on her. As the only remaining noble princess of the gnome royal family, Vanessa had always dreamed that the glory of the gnome empire would continue in her hands. And this unrealistic fantasy also forced her to carry out the unspeakable escape plan step by step. In the past, Vanessa had always thought that she had been very secretive and successful. However, when Tygol, who was far away from the whirlpool, suddenly appeared in front of her, she suddenly realized that her every move was under the control of the Magi. How much information did the Magi have? How many core members of the Magic Association had been exposed? Could the escape plan still be carried out? Just as Vanessa's mind was in a mess, and she did not know what to do, the cockpit of the Gnome Ripper opened, and Tygol, who was dressed in a tight leather suit, jumped out. He came before her and grabbed her shoulders, shaking her lightly. "Wake up, Vanessa. Your plan and your people are all under the control of the Crimson family. No matter how good your intentions are, your reckless actions will not bring the gnomes a bright future. It will only lead more gnomes to fall into the abyss with you. Turn back, Vanessa. As long as you are willing to give up on these fantasies, I can use my life to protect you and continue living." Although Vanessa was more petite than Tygol, her weakness was only on the surface. At the end of the day, Vanessa also had the abilities of a high-grade mechanical witch. At such a close distance, it was not a problem to deal with Tygol, who was only a mid-grade magus. If Tygol hid in the Gnome Ripper, he might be able to unleash the terrifying power of a high-grade magus. But once he came out, he would only be a slightly stronger gnome magic machine manipulator. The pair of strange crimson mechanical eyes on Vanessa's exquisite and perfect face shone brightly on the top floor of the White Tower. In the spacious and bright Witchcraft Hall, Winley sat upright and still, quietly listening to the old sly fox count Winley's report. In the corner of the hall, Cabby was rubbing his hands with an excited expression. "You mean that Tygol has already brought his men into Vanessa's residence, and then asked his men to retreat, leaving him alone inside?" Winley's crimson eyes shone with a frightening light as she asked in a cold voice. "Yes. Is there anything strange in Vanessa's residence? We have been monitoring closely during this period of time. We have never seen her communicating with the other members of the Magus Association, but the activities of the Magus Association have been increasing day by day. So, I suspect that there might be some special equipment in her residence that can communicate with the outside world." Winley had been assisting Winley all these years, and had become more experienced and capable. "My lady, if I'm not wrong, Vanessa might have some gnome teleportation devices hidden there." "Teleportation devices? What's their use?" Winley frowned when she heard the word teleportation. "Those devices are only effective for gnomes. They can be used for point-to-point short-distance teleportation. The teleportation distance is less than 100 miles. Teleportation of gnomes?" Winley's eyes widened. She stood up abruptly and ordered, "Go, detain Vanessa immediately. If she dares to resist, kill her." "Yes." Chapter 1061. When Winlier and Cabby brought a large group of men to Vanessa's residence, they were stopped by a small team of combat magical equipment that was waiting there. The leader of the goblins was domineering and barbaric. He was determined not to let them pass without Leader Tygol's orders. Cabby was so angry that he almost went berserk after failing to communicate with them. Winlier was indeed a sly old fox. He reached out to stop Cabby, who was about to command his men to charge forward. He then said to the goblin leader with a sinister smile, "We are here on the orders of Tower Master Winley. Even Lord Tygol has no right to stop us. Since you say that you will obey the leader's orders, then contact Lord Tygol and see what he has to say." The goblin leader hesitated for a moment. He could only take out a communication device that looked like a black button and desperately try to call for Tygol. Unfortunately, no matter how it called out, apart from a strange buzzing noise, it could not hear anything else. This had never happened before. Even the goblin leader broke out in cold sweat. "Make way, all of you make way. That Vanessa is involved in a rebellion. If any of you dare to stop us, you will be in cahoots with her. I am here on the orders of the master. Kill without mercy." Cabby was so anxious that he jumped 3 feet high. He waved his hand and released the grade 3 elemental magical equipment from the puppet amulet. A dull thud resounded. Even the sturdy floor that had been strengthened many times by witchcraft could not bear the weight of the elemental magical equipment. Where the elemental magical equipment appeared, the floor caved in to form a shallow pit. It was filled with fine cracks that resembled a spider web. Elemental magical equipment. It's the master's elemental magical equipment. When the elemental magical equipment steadily stood up from the shallow pit, the goblins in the corridor cried out in shock, looking at the metal leg that was as thick as a stone wall, looking at the towering body that almost broke through the ceiling, feeling the violent and scorching aura. The goblins controlling the combat magical equipment could not help but swallow their saliva. Oh my God, the combat magical equipment they controlled was like a little rabbit in front of a lion. Other than trembling, what else could they do? The elemental machinery was a Tier 3 creation that the Patriarch had personally forged. Naturally, everyone in the Crimson family knew about it. Therefore, when the Battle Magical Machine squad saw the elemental magical machine, they could only move to the sides obediently and didn't dare to stop Kobe. Charge! Smash the door. It was his first time controlling such a high-level wizard creation, and the gnome Cabby was indescribably excited. In the midst of its violent roar, the elemental magic equipment suddenly lowered its body, and the metal armor on its back opened, revealing dozens of nozzles shining with a dark blue luster, and then simultaneously ejected a high-temperature flame that was more than 10 meters long. In the next second, the huge body of the elemental magic machinery moved forward at an astonishing speed and fiercely punched the alloy door of the residence. Not good. Cabby, who was still commanding the elemental magic machinery, instantly realized that something was amiss. He hurriedly crouched down and covered his ears. Unfortunately, at the next moment, a deafening metallic rumble exploded in the narrow corridor of the wizard's pagoda. Almost in an instant, all of the gnomes and vampires present swayed under the impact of the terrifying sound waves, purplish-black snakes of blood dripping from their eyes, ears, and nostrils. The alloy door that was 20 centimeters thick instantly shattered under the impact of such a violent force and flew into the residence. The elemental magic machinery stepped on the floor that had been reduced to dust as if it didn't feel anything and walked quickly through the door. "Oh my God, this is too strong, isn't it?" Cabby grumbled nonsensically as he struggled to get up from the ground and charged into the residence. The interior of the residence was already a mess. The door that had been sent flying swept through the living room and crashed into the stone wall on the other side, turning the interior into a complete mess. But looking around, other than a tall battle magical machine standing silently in the corner of the living room, there was not a single person in the living room. Battle magical machine? This is our leader's magical machine. Where's our leader? The gnome leader could not help but exclaim in shock. The cockpit door of the gnome ripper was open, and not a single person could be seen within. And on the floor in the middle of the living room, there was a pool of purplish-black blood. Blood? Whose blood was it? Vanessa's or Tigulus? No, Vanessa was a mechanic now, and there was no more blood in her body. Then, Vinlier and Cabby, who had barged into the residence, looked at each other and cursed inwardly. The former waved his hand and shouted, "Search!" Immediately, a dozen muscular vampires darted out from behind him and dashed into different parts of the residence. Moments later, Vinlier and the rest appeared in front of the 5 gnome teleportation devices and stared at these damned devices with hostile expressions. The gnome engineer and the team went forward to fiddle with them and quickly came to a conclusion. The 5 gnome teleportation devices were pointed in 5 directions around the White Tower, and the one that was pointing to the southwest seemed to have just been used. Southwest. That seemed to be a large settlement of the White Tower's citizens 20 miles away. It seemed like Princess Vanessa had secretly set up a contact point there, and it was used for internal members to communicate privately. It was no wonder that the people that the old fox Venlier sent to spy on them could not detect Vanessa's abnormality. She's indeed cunning. After her. But before the few of them could step out of the residence, the wizard's pagoda beneath them suddenly shook, and a loud, dull thud came from the corridor. Following that, a clamor of terrified screams came from outside. Venlier and Cabby looked at each other and exclaimed in unison, "Teleportation formation." Cabby was about to rush out in a panic to see what was going on, but he was stopped by Venlier. "Why are you stopping me? Let me see what's going on," Cabby exclaimed in confusion. At this point, Venlier's expression had completely calmed down, and he shook his head at Cabby. "We've made the wrong calculations. We thought that these fellows would escape as soon as they realized that they've been exposed, but it looks like not only did they not choose to escape, they chose to forcefully carry out their plan. So the important thing now is not to capture Vanessa, but to protect the teleportation formation." With the old fox's reminder, Cabby instantly came to his senses. Since something has happened to the teleportation formation here, then their next target must be the teleportation formation in the Goblin Dimension's mechanical town. You don't have to worry about the matters here at the White Tower. With Vanessa's authority, there's no way she can access the teleportation formation on the upper level. So the most she can do is blow up the public teleportation formation in the teleportation plaza. So head to the mechanical town immediately and assist Lord Desira in protecting the teleportation formation there. That's the crux of this matter. Once I'm done here, I'll immediately bring some men to help you there. Understood. Leave the mechanical mech city to me. Cabby nodded in understanding and turned around to put away his elemental magic machinery. He brought his group of trusted subordinates, and under the lead of a vampire wizard, they quickly rushed to the internal teleportation formation on the 11th level of the White Tower. A moment later, with a flash of white light, Cabby appeared with over 20 of his trusted subordinates in the public teleportation formation in the Goblin Dimension's mechanical town. After a moment of dizziness from the long-distance teleportation, Cabby heard the wild and concentrated sounds of firearms and energy rays around the teleportation formation, followed by a familiar shout. "Get down." It was the voice of Wind Wizard Desira. Cabby was an old member of the Crimson family and was very familiar with Wind Wizard Desira. Hence, when he heard Desira's angry shout, he immediately got down without hesitation. BCB. A concentrated wave of energy rays shot out, and the large group of subordinates that Cabby brought with him did not have the vitality to recover from the teleportation as quickly as Cabby did. In a moment of daze, they were shot full of holes by the energy rays. Damn it, something really happened here. Cabby cursed as he raised his hand and released a grade 3 elemental magic machinery. With a dull thud, the huge grade 3 elemental magic machinery appeared and immediately blocked the concentrated long-range attacks in front of them. Attack! Attack! Kill those enemies! As Cabby roared in anger, the elemental magic machinery slowly stretched its body, allowing the concentrated attacks to hit its metallic body and produce crackling sounds, but did not seem to care. Suddenly, the countless hidden metal plates on the chest and arms of the elemental magic machinery flipped open, revealing the densely packed energy cannons underneath. With a flick of its finger, close to 100 dazzling red rays shot out, instantly engulfing the team of magic machinery that was madly attacking not far away. A series of concentrated energy fireballs exploded, instantly drowning the enemy team. Then, the elemental magic machinery retracted its arms, and the flames on its back burst out. Its entire body turned into a meteor as it charged into the sea of flames. Two iron fists danced left and right, smashing the cockpit of a metal magic machinery with a single punch, turning the gnome technician inside into meat paste. Another fist smashed the head of another metal magic machinery into its chest. Following a violent burst of electric sparks, purplish-black blood spurted out from the gaps in the metal shell. Although the energy cannons that were constantly bombarding the elemental magic machinery's chest were frightening, they were far less ferocious than its close-range attacks. Those metal magic machinery that were madly attacking might not die after being bombarded by the energy cannons, but they would definitely not be spared from a single iron fist. In an instant, the elemental magic machinery that was guarding the metal door leading to the teleportation portal was actually able to fight against 100 of them alone, causing hundreds of metal magic machinery to flee pitifully. The enemy's concentrated and fierce attacks that landed on the body of the elemental magic machinery were either blocked by the external energy shield or the indestructible alloy body. There was no way for them to cause sufficient damage to the elemental magic machinery. Its body is made of magic-repelling alloy. Don't use your magical energy to attack it. Go, go, go. Engage it in close-range combat. One of the leaders of the rebel army seemed to have some knowledge. He deduced the reason from the reflection of the energy rays hitting the body of the elemental magic machinery, and immediately called for his subordinates to change their tactics. The Wind Wizard Desura, who was suppressed by the rebel army near the teleportation portal, heard the roar of the other party. His eyes immediately turned white, and a violent natural storm surrounded his body. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.